Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah. But can we keep the part where I yell more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got like what? 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to start with that?
Here we go, exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with Smoky Bar.
No. It's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch, and it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
And we are on.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin, and with me on the other side of the screen, as always, is Jeff. Jeff, say hello to everybody tonight.
Hey, everyone.
And with us, we are joined once again, this is his second appearance on the show, by Daniel D. Fox, creative director for both Zweihander RPG and one of his latest creations, Flames of Freedom, which we're going to talk about tonight. So, Daniel, say hi to the crowd.
Hi to the crowd. Hi, everybody. It's been almost a year.
I think so.
Since we last spoke on here. Yeah, because since then you've ran games on the Zweihander channel, of course. G2KB just grown exponentially since then too, which is amazing.
Yeah, if there's one thing about COVID, it's given us a lot of time.
For sure. We did up our schedule quite aggressively during the beginning of quarantine. We had to dial it back a little. We overstepped our bounds a little when real life back in. So it was
Absolutely.
It's definitely been a lot of fun, though. I definitely have had my fun with Zweihander over the last year, that's for sure. So
yeah, and I've actually got the chance to play it, so that's a new thing for me. In fact, we just played yesterday, so that was great.
That game was bonkers.
Yes, it was.
It was completely bonkers. I don't even know why I try to write this stuff. They just do what they want, and I just have to follow along.
That's the best kind of game, though. When people do the unexpected, I think that's when I find that games for me personally tend to work best. It's like I can craft and hone this story and create these guardrails and all these this contingency for this and that, and the players make some decision that takes off the rails. I'm like, we're just gonna roll with it. It can work, and it only turns out amazing. So.
I'm not sure what rails were in place for this one, but we certainly jumped over them.
It's not a sandbox; it's a beach.
Yep.
It never ends. So
it's summer. It's spring break in Cancun. That's
what it is. It is. Totally.
Yesterday we got into time travel and dealing with paradoxes that occur, and I'm not going to say my face wasn't improved.
That Mr. Fox had nothing to do with for this thing. I just started rolling. He's not. He can't take responsibility for any of the time travel stuff.
Okay.
I did it all myself. That's not what a difference engine does normally. It just does in my game. So
yeah, I ended up with a nice canine skull face, flesh crown, and I caught on fire for some reason. So that was a primo upgrade.
Chaos are in fact his responsibility.
Thanks, Steve Jobs, the creator of the difference engine, and whatever era you're playing in, it's corrupting, right? Our difference engine ended up being used to calculate the future. So we kind of followed a similar vein as you did in our Queen of Embers game. We had our difference engine was used to calculate the future, and they're using a plot device. And
yeah, well, this one they strapped it to a Hal Davidson, and they had to hit 88 meters per second and obtain 1.21 gallons of bottle lightning in order to jump time. So they could go back to stop the crap that happened in my first game. So that's what they're doing now, is going back to fix the first game. So
there's a joke called the joke, the Aristocrats. It's this really body joke where it's always different every time somebody tells it. That's basically Zweihander. You just described it. It's all these different disparate things that you can pull together with tape and shoestring, and sometimes it like players are like, "This is incredible," and you're like, "I just made it all up," and that's the best game. It's the best game to play. It's like,
you guys want to burn down a building full of cultists? All right, I'm game. Tell me how you're going to do it. Like, the bottle bombs wasn't enough, so they had to create an entire Donkey Kong barrel-sized bottle bomb. They're just lugging this thing around now, waiting for a chance to use it. Like, yeah, whatever. I'm game. Yeah, that's fine.
It's just been straight up chaos the entire time. It's been good stuff. It's been real good stuff.
But yeah. So,
Our terrible rolls aside.
Now, you guys, over the course of the last year, since we talked to you last, you guys have put out several books. I got another one here, Main Gouch. You guys released it. It has a lot of these rules and stuff that we're talking about that we've been using. And it's a fantastic supplement for Zweihander. And then Dark Astral.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these are built on a D100 system. And as you've gone along and put out more and more books leading into Flames of Freedom, which we're going to talk about heavily today, you guys have progressed and learned a lot, perhaps, about how you want to put these things out and how you go about the care that's taken into putting into all these books is absolutely amazing. I'm so happy with the products so far that I've gotten and the quality. And I know your first trip here, we talked a lot about the quality of these books, and it's great to see that that's continued through all the other lines that you guys have continued to put out.
Yeah, I stumbled across this video the other day on YouTube for Questing Beast. So Ben Milton does like these. I'm sure you're familiar with him, probably both of you and listeners, viewers, whoever is tuning in.
We got both.
But he does these reviews of OSR games. Yeah, both of y'all, all of them all. But he was reviewing Neverland, which we just released. This is written by Andrew Kolb. And it's a 5th edition game, but it's based in the world of Neverland, and it's kind of a dark story. But anyhow, he was talking about. He's like, this book came out of nowhere. It cost $25. It has silver gold leaf on the exterior and beautiful interiors. And I was like, that's the standards we carried forward because I knew that with the success of Zweihander and the make, and we talked about this a little bit before, but that to me, like the collectability and the durability of a book is something that a larger publisher like the company I work for, Andrews McNeil, has reached to. So when I think about the way we position not just Zweihander and games that are powered by Zweihander, but all RPGs and all books we produce that are RPG or RPG adjacent, I want them all to have that sort of like collector's grade quality. And that's very important. And in fact, we continue to reiterate. So as an example, our 3rd print run of Zweihander just got comps today. And it's even better. It's even better quality than the 2nd version that we published.
Nice.
With new paper and new layout and all this fun stuff. So I think those things are important to continue to improve. I mean, a lot of publishers don't have that opportunity, obviously, but we do. So that's what we do. We make amazing collectible stuff you can put on your shelf or play around the table and be proud of spending however much money you do on it, hopefully inexpensively. It's what we try to aim for, at least. But
it's appreciated. It's great knowing that your book's going to hold up. I can't tell you how many of the old school books I had where you just pick up the cover and the entire interior just comes out, clumps of pages. You're like,
since you gave this thing to me a year ago, it's still holding together well, and I've been using it, so it ain't just sitting on my shelf. I get used it every week, so it's been put through a lot.
One of the largest RPG books I think in my collection is Stormbringer, which was done by Games Workshop prior to the creation of Warhammer Fantasy, and I have it, and it's so sturdy. And like when I think about like book longevity, like it's got to be cool, obviously, like cool cover, cool pages, all that stuff. But I think about like the planks, right? This is how the sausage is made. Like books have like your little rounded spine, which rounded spines are better than flat spines for durability, but we reinforce all the planks to ensure that stays together, so you don't have pages falling apart. So to your point, your book a year later, like we have books we've been using around our game table for 3 years that were like used every single Wednesday when we game or whenever we're doing dev sessions on the weekend, because that's the way it works. And these books are still making cracking sounds when you open them because the pages are just crisp. Stuff.
I tell you, these are amazing quality. The products themselves are, once you get hold of them. I mean, they're absolutely fantastic. So I've been completely satisfied with the books. They're amazing. You guys do a great job with them. So I just want to take a moment and just thank you for that. And just again, I know we're not going to cover it like we did the first time, but just the quality of these books and what goes into them is absolutely fantastic. So.
We'll spend an hour and a half talking about it now. I would, though, if I could, given the opportunity.
This is going to come back around because we're going to start talking a little bit about the Kickstarter and about the set of books and everything coming out with it. So I just kind of wanted to get preface, and just show one of these books. Back. These things are serious books. They're not. You will definitely, if you go into the Kickstarter, you start looking at, do you want to get a PDF version or do you want to get a book? Like I'm telling you right now, just put out the money and get the books. Like they're definitely worth it. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's something. I mean, we talked about this last time, I think, but there's something nice about having a book in your hand. That the actual feeling of the book, being able to look at it, it's very different than the PDFs. I'm a very tech guy, but I still prefer books. Like I don't know anybody that actually prefers PDFs. I've asked around.
I don't either, but I'll tell you this much. And again, this is something that you've done since the last time we were here. That Zweihander, that PDF for Zweihander is absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. The indexed one that you can get, I have it through on Acrobat on my phone, and that thing is one of the most intuitive, best put together phone PDFs I've ever seen. So you want to talk a little bit about like what you're doing with those sorts of things? Those are
So I think that, to your point around PDFs, like I use PDFs when I'm developing, right? I have my monitor set up at work and I have like my PDF here, I have my books around me because I can quickly search, right? So I use my PDF for that as a developer. And the phone PDF I use on my phone, like if I'm just like moving around, if I'm, waiting for something, I'm at the work where I'm at, I'm like in line for getting lunch. I think really what the goal there was to create which I think D&D has done a really good job of, is basically creating contextual engagement. So no matter what context you're in, whether you're talking to a friend about your D&D character or you're sitting down at the game table and you've got your book in front of you, you have some format that matches the experience or the situation and setting that you're in, that's easily accessible. So when we started thinking about what that looks like for Zweihander, there was kind of, in my mind, kind of 4 prongs, right? The first prong, which is the physical book. The second prong is the standard PDF. The third prong is a Roll20 presence for free, because it's a whole thing. But the fourth prong, which is important because we carry these $900 plus devices in our pocket everywhere we go. And it's also how we integrate. It's how we engage on Twitter, on social media, how we engage with the TTRGP market. It's how we talk about our games that we love online, how we bicker and fight. We use phones. So we wanted to develop a version of Zweihander that was suited for the phone. And we actually worked with Drive-Thru-RPG on this because they approached us to say, hey, we're piloting this new program. It's called a phone PDF. Like, here's the steps. And like, to just caveat this, like when you create a phone PDF, you're basically laying out a book a second time. Right. So whatever you're paying your layout artist, you're paying them twice. So we're like, all right, we'll experiment and see how it works and see what the engagement looks like and see if people actually use it on their phones. So we took the standards that Drive-Thru-RPG gave us and we improved them. Not to say they weren't good, but they can be better. That comes mostly from my experience in agency because we developed a lot of online apps and just online engagement tools for customers. So we made some improvements. We released our phone PDF. We're the first to market with it. It absolutely exploded. We had, I think, 40, because we did like free for like 24 hours or something like that, just to like get it out and see like, it's like, is this something you people would be interested in seeing in the future for more games? So we had, I think, 4,600 downloads in 24 hours. Wow. Of the PDF, the phone PDF for free, which was great because now we've got lots of copies in the wild, and we can get a lot of good feedback, right? It's like, what do you think of this format? What could be improved? What should we change the next iteration? So we carry that forward with Mongosh and then, of course, with the player's handbook, and we're going to do the same thing for Flames of Freedom. So because it's proven, at least at this point, to be this value prop is high because once again, it's about contextual engagement. You can read your Zweihander on your phone, on your laptop, on your computer, physical book in hand, and the format that you have is always fits the situation you're in. If you're on Roll20, you want to play Zweihander, go grab the free Pendium. Roll20 is fantastic for that. But if you want a version on your phone, you want all the artwork and all that stuff, like this is what we did the phone PDF, and we did it essentially without charging any more money. We made it that we took those PDFs and made a combined thing. I think it's like $19, I want to say, but it's like for the regular PDF and the phone PDF together. And that I think has helped kind of set us apart because other companies are taking a little bit different approach that works best for them and their P&Ls and all that fun stuff. But for us, we want to just make it free as part of the PDF process.
I don't know if it'll focus in on my camera, but I've got it here.
It's fighting.
Yeah, I see it.
I mean, it's completely like you just tap on it and it just takes you right to like everything, and it's so intuitive. You can just everything you need to do it just takes you right through there, and it's fantastic because while I do love these books, they are together like sometimes like 70 pounds worth of book that I'm around. You can't just take them everywhere with you all the time. So it's great to have this other option as well. So as much as I do love my books, like sometimes I'm on the go at work and my players will ask me questions and I can just pop up the PDF, take a quick screenshot, like, here's your profession, fill it out. Like, whatever I need to do. So I use that thing a lot. It's been a fantastic product as well that you guys have put out there. And so again, like these are things that you guys have put out there over the last year. You guys have had a very busy year as Zweihander. Like I said, leading up through your various projects up to what we're going to really get into tonight, like everything from being on Roll20 now with your compendium, as you mentioned, like that thing has been amazing for grabbing rules and tossing them into the sheets and being able to put that stuff out there. And if you follow me and you watch me do my Zweihander GM prep every other Wednesday, like you see I do that a lot. I pull things directly. Do you?
I watch it every week. What are you talking about? Yeah. I watch all of your shows, and I typically watch them after they're coming out. Yeah, of course.
Oh, sure.
Like I watch.
Nice.
I'll tell you why. But there's a reason. The reason for this, one, I enjoy watching content, right? And sure, part of it's ego driven, but mostly it's because I can see people playing Zweihander the Wild, and I can understand other people's user experience with it, and that user experience can be drawn in to create the next iteration of what we're working on. Flames of Freedom is a great example of that. Like I've watched thousands of hours of Zweihander across Twitch, YouTube, and seen people's experience, like what they did well with, what they struggled with, and that all feeds into the foundation of the development. Of course I love a good story, but I also it's good to see that user experience in the wild where it's like I'm not in the game, 2, I'm not in the chat, 3, it's not being potentially the experiment, if you will, isn't necessarily being, I'm not like leaning on the scale. So I get to see real raw gameplay because there is especially in times of COVID, I think game design has to adapt to not only just the medium that people demand now, which, Roll20 is a part of that, but it also has to meet the demands of how people look and interact with games. Because because games in a book don't work the same in VTT. And I have a short story to share about that later on in the interview, because we'll eventually talk about with Flames of Freedom. But I watched the show 100%. I don't always catch it live, but I watched the show. I watched 5 hours of Zweihander a week. Swear to God, hand on my heart. And because it's part of my process. On Mondays I come in, check my email, queue something up, and I watch it. I don't listen, I watch it. Just to kind of see, like how people are interacting with the system. It's important because it's hard to get that sort of feedback from a controlled playtest group. It's really difficult because they're already biased. So people playing the game out in the wild is unbiased, right? You don't, the creators, the developers, whoever's not in the middle of it. And that to me is like the best way to kind of, watching your show, watching your way you do your GM prep stuff is the best way for me to understand like how the games are being played, how it's being used, and how to improve it in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing too, because when you're giving feedback to a creator, you know some things, but there are certain elements that are not obvious to you, like during the that expression. Like it may come up in the middle of a scene or whatever, and you kind of like have your interaction with it, and it's positive or negative, and then you move on and maybe just forget about it. But, going back and watching those things, you can see it. Like, oh, here's where they spent a little extra time trying to look up a rule. Or here's where, there was somebody who looks a little frustrated by this or that. Or here's where somebody got super excited about the fact that this worked in this way, in this, context. And, I think that's a really valuable tool. And you were saying you were just watching, not listening? So just going for body language cues?
Yeah. And I think that especially in the context of VTT, like you get a different sort of feedback. I think having played in demos at conventions and having ran people who I don't even know, like I go to a game store, run a game randomly, and I have no idea that I made the game. I just go in there and run a game, and I look for tells, like physical tells. But I think on VTT, because you're so focused, right? There's no in hand, there's no people around you, there's no distractions save for just your screen in front of you. So there are physical tells, and you can see discomfort. Not granted, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything like that, but there are physical tells when people get frustrated with something. So I think I make notes. I've got I've got these 2 red little D&D books right here. I just bought these. I fill one of these roughly, like these those college bound books. I probably fill 2 a month, just with notes. In general, it's a way for me to develop on paper as opposed to developing in Google Docs. And I sometimes I revisit, sometimes I don't. But like I use these to kind of record. Like as an example, the way turns work in Zweihander without rounds is a little complicated when you think about on fire or bleeding ticking down every turn. So taking that
corrected me.
By taking that feedback, I was like, okay. When we looked at Flames of Freedom, we had 4 different initiative systems. 4, including the original one, so 5 technically. But we play tested 4 different initiative systems based on what Matt had been running on the channel, what Chuck with Defenders have been running. We tried Popcorn Initiative. We tried Baton Pass Initiative. And we ended up landing on what, ironically, ended up landing like right back where I started, which was like a D&D initiative. And it's like, why? This should have been so obvious like 4 years ago. But once again, like you learn through other people's experience. And this is where a game designer really has to set aside their ego, right? And has to say, okay, whatever vision I have in my head of like the way it should work, the reality is I'm not the one playing the game; it's everybody else. So, depending on the size of the team, obviously Zweihander is a little different beast because it was mostly mine. But with Flames of Freedom and future games, it's a larger team. So, I tease Adam Rose about this a lot. I said, Adam, we can sit down. I can convince you of anything I want. But if you add a third person, you have a third dissenting opinion. 3 people have a tendency to disagree more than they do agree, because I can convince pretty much anyone one-on-one why a rule should make sense. So that's the way I look at playtesting, is that I try to observe, I try to watch, and I take those things forward and redevelop. And we've got some of this feedback from the early playtesters. It's like, is this Zweihander's 2nd edition? I'm like, first off, there's no 2nd edition Zweihander. But, and this is the caveat, is that we will always improve what's there. But everything will be compatible backwards without creating the cluster F that, say, complete Book of Fighters did for AD&D, like the kit book, right? Where it's like, why do you even need the player's handbook? These things are more powerful than standard stuff. It's a careful balance. So it's a long way, I guess, of saying, those things are important to watch and to take feedback on and to reiterate, because I think that anytime you have a game engine that does the same thing between every single book, it's a missed opportunity. One company that does that very, very well, who like learns and adapts, is Bodifius with the 2D20 system. Like every single game they create is unique to that IP, and it's always an improvement upon the prior edition. So you always have that like foundational experience of like, I get the 2D20 system through Conan, but when you go and play, say, the Dune game, like it's going to feel somewhat familiar because you played 2D20 before. So it's kind of it becomes like a language, right? The same that D20 was, and that late 90s, early 2000s. Like everyone knows what a D20 game is. It has a shared DNA, so we understand fundamentally how it works. So same with Powered by Zweihander Games. The intention is to do that.
Yeah, that was something interesting there is you're saying you went full circle back to the initiative that you started with, which is kind of old school D&D. And I'm curious if you think that's just familiarity in the players, or is there something about that particular style of initiative that is, mathematically or experientially better?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, I think a lot of it was kind of initially the reason why I was a big advocate of it first. After when we started developing Flames of Freedom initiative system, felt comfortable in the same sense that, to use a silly metaphor, like you go back to your hometown and there's like something that's there that's like the thing that you've built up like kind of washes away. It's like, yeah, this makes sense. I remember that place. I used to be here, and you get that nostalgia, right? They call it nostalgia. I think for me, it was nostalgia, which is the reason why I wanted to move back to that initiative system. But that's not enough, because I'm the lead developer on it, but I'm not the only person in the room. This has to pass muster with other people, primarily Adam Rose, who really, especially with Flames of Freedom, was pretty instrumental in, he's not billed as a lead developer, but he pretty much is. He has an equal stake in it. So when I thought about like what else we could do with our playtest group on Wednesdays, like we ran through all these different initiative systems. We tried them all out, and not just like we'll try one week and try them another week. We tried them for weeks. So as an example, we were using game rounds, as you see in Flames of Freedom now, in our home Zweihander game for the last year and a half. We're like, we think this is right. We're going to try this. And then we decide like, fuck it. Let's go. Let's scrape it away. Let's start from scratch and try a different initiative. So we ran out a little bit longer to discover this has major issues. So we eventually came back to where we started, which was nostalgia, but also experiential. I think as a game developer, we're challenged to create something unique and new at times. And that's fine, providing that it's elegant, that it works within the framework of the game. Sometimes it isn't necessarily as the truth. I think that initiative, looking back as Zweihander, could have done it differently. I would have used traditional initiative because if we're trying to do something kind of iterative and new and kind of similar to Final Fantasy Tactics. I remember I was reading.
Okay.
Yeah, I had this, one of my first notebooks I wrote in, like, it's like Final Fantasy Tactics. I'm gonna make that game. And the initial system was me too. Tactics Ogre is amazing. Yeah.
Tactics Ogre was amazing. Yes.
Shit, yeah. But that was the foundation of the tactical system. I was like, I want to make that. And then now it's like we don't use that initiative system at all in our home game. We've house ruled that. Mike Bossler, like he gives me shit about this constantly. He's like, "Oh, you're house ruling the game that was based from a game of house rules." I'm like, "That's Mike. I'm doing that." Because I guarantee you, Mike Merles and Jeremy Crawford and everybody else who's playing D&D is not using base D&D.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, no.
Right? Who uses games as they're written? That's a great thing about it. Is like if the game is designed to allow you to flex and mold and be modular, it should create affordance to create the experience you want at your game table. So when you ask me, like, is it because it was old school or is it because it's experiential? I think it's different for everybody. It just happened to be that we ended up going back to foundational D&D style initiative, but we had to make some changes to fit into this Zweihander system, and that's what became the initiative system for Flames of Freedom.
Gotcha.
I know just for the standard Zweihander rules is written initiative system. I just love the fact that you just roll it once. And then it just lingers honestly, waiting for the moment you decide it's going to get used. And so you don't have that initial roll initiative moment because you already rolled it. And we're in combat. And it was like, oh, combat just happened. And here's your turn order. Or at the same time, it's like social intrigue just happened. And here's your turn order. Like it's already just ominously staring at you that like you're not going first or you're going first. Like it's already just there waiting for you. Like
it kind of sets a tone. It's interesting. It's like, how am I feeling today is kind of the way it comes across to me.
You're having a bad day today. You're having a bad day. Your initiative sucks. Your whole day's bad.
On the wrong side. It's just done.
I think so we carried that forward in Flames of Freedom, and I think that there's kind of two reasons behind it. And one, this roll initiative before the game started, we used that back when I played D&D. That was the way I ran my game, because what I hated was like the hiccup. Like it's like, okay, all this cool narrative lead up, then all right, guys, roll initiative, and like suddenly people are like snapped out of the narrative. They're like, okay, now I'm gonna structure time and super, and like you lose the role play, you lose that steam sometimes, at least for my players. So we always like roll at the beginning and the beginning of combat, and that's the initiative for the rest of the time. But I think especially in Zweihander and in Flames of Freedom, I'm a big fan of like pre and post game rituals. Like the most common post game ritual we practice is like, you guys get X amount of experience for playing today. Thank you. Like D&D, it's like you kill all the stuff, you do the tallies, you look at your experience, you're like, all right, can I move up a level? For Zweihander, you make the choice to buy in advance. But I like pre and post game rituals, and we in Flames of Freedom especially, we kind of standardize it, because it was just a sidebar before. Like some game masters may require you to roll initiative at the beginning of the session. In Flames of Freedom, it says you will roll initiative at the beginning of the game session. That's part of the pre-game ritual. It's a pre-game ritual in the same sense that you, quote, recap the previous game you played. You gain reward points for it. So it also, from a game master perspective, or in the case of the Flames of Freedom, the historian, as we call them, it helps you. Yeah, it helps you control the flow of chaos of gaming. Right? I mean, BTT, obviously, like you have to like be very patient with people, because everybody gets a little bit of spotlight. At a game table, you can speak openly. You don't have to worry about like digital communication, like being inhibited or hear everybody. So you can use that to be like, okay, a lot of things are happening, but I'm going to look at the initiative ladder and say, okay, Dustin, you're going first. Like, what are you going to do? Even if it's not combat, you can use that as a way to meter interaction. And it's even more important if you're unpracticed at playing games online, like I am. I would like to say that I run a lot of games online, but I don't. I run mostly on Zoom. I'd rather roll dice and use paper on Zoom than I would to use Fantasy Grounds. I just don't. It's not an experience that I necessarily wholly enjoy. Even though we've had to do it based on circumstance. But yeah, that initiative ladder for me, for early D&D and Zweihander and Flames of Freedom, it's a way for me personally to control the chaos of 3 to 6 or hell, sometimes 10 people getting in a room and like wanting to roll dice and do shit. And that's great. It's a good thing to have. And a game master can, as opposed to saying, everybody be quiet, you just be like, that piece of paper on my wall, you can't see it here, but I have a little marker board. I'm like, at the beginning of the game, after we crack open our pop and everything pre-COVID, we're like, all right, somebody record initiative before we start recording. I can always go back and be like, oh, that's our initiative board. Okay, Adam, you need to be quiet. Nick, it's your turn. So that's how we control social intrigue, do just chase scenes, wilderness travel, combat, everything. I can refer back to that, and it seems that those. I mean, sometimes like I think games try to train game masters to be a little bit punitive. And I think that a tool like this, without being like, you lose experience points for interrupting each other. I remember being a kid and doing that. I remember the weird, I remember the punitive mechanics of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition. Like, you guys gain stress for being jerks to each other around the game table. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some cool stuff about that game, but that was the one I did not like. So long and the short of it is that, rolling initiative at the beginning of a game, like even if it's not Zweihander, like if you're playing any game, just roll initiative before the game starts. And I guarantee what will happen. I guarantee it. 9 times out of 10, this is, whatever. I think it's going to happen for most people to be like, you can move between narrative to structured time smoothly, and you can still maintain that role play steam. You can still maintain that air of like interactivity and like being in the moment, and less about like, okay, now we're going into the numbers grind. I've seen it with D&D. I've seen that people adopt it for other games that are not Zweihander. Blue Rose is an example. And it works well, but your mileage may vary, obviously. Caveats abound always.
We're going to have to try that, because
with Zweihander, there's just so many systems you can use it in. Whereas most of the time with most games, it's like combat is when you need initiative. Otherwise, everything's free form, which is okay. But I mean, there just is a lot of other systems that you guys have created for your games that I think we will see continue probably with Flames of Freedom, if I had to guess. Again, we're going to talk about social intrigue, chase scenes. Like all these things are probably going to be maybe different, a little different in some way, but will probably still exist. And they all use an initiative system. So having that thing ready to go, when you're moved from one system to another, it's great to know that that doesn't change. You're not re-rolling initiative every time for each of these things. Like they're seamless.
That's right.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on the show about how to maintain that role play through a scene like a combat scene. We had like an entire episode where we came up with different ideas, and I don't think this was one of our ideas that came up. Like I don't think the initiative tracker came up for us, but it should have, because that makes a lot of sense to me. The shorter time you have between those transitions, the easier it is for people to keep that in their mind, like you were saying before, and keep the flavor going. And I think maybe the pacing goes a little quicker on turns, just because like I think people are, when you get like preconditioned with that like long gap of rolling initiative, waiting for it to go up on the chart. Oh, wait, you said 13. Oh, wait, hold on. No, it's 14. 14. Okay, 14. You broke the tie.
Yeah.
Okay, and by the time you get around to your turn, you've lost it. And then everyone's just like, let's just get through this.
That's right. And yeah, I think that's sometimes the simplest answer, I think, satisfies the need condition. And really, I think it begs the question, which is, what are we trying to solve for, right? So you did about like, how do you keep people in the moment of role play? And what typically breaks down role play, I'm sure you cover this in your show too, is like, it's when you start introducing game mechanics.
Yes.
That's when things start to break down. So you can't guarantee every player on the table will know the game inside out. I mean, not even game masters or dungeon masters or historians will. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't need to know the whole game to play it. But you can create invisible guardrails. Back we were talking about before about your beach party game. With time travel. You can create invisible guardrails that are innocuous, harmless, but help you as players, the game master, like control the flow and the pace. I won't get too much of that because I will talk forever about that too. So if I'm talking way too much, stop me because I will talk all night.
You're doing great.
It helps us. It's less work
you're here
for
with
us.
us. They hear us every week, so we're.
That's true.
You're absolutely right, though.
Randomness is coming up in the chat here in terms of initiative. Like Malice Conspiracy is talking about Shadowrun and liking it because the initiative stat is more stable and less random as compared to D&D. Where do you fit in on that? Because obviously we were talking just earlier about, it's how you feel in the day, the way it kind of comes across. But how important was that randomness to the initiative for you?
Well, I think initiative, and this is more of a question of like the philosophy of game design, which is, are game mechanics an expression of the character? Are they an expression of the game? Because you can sit down and say, my character has a high strength, therefore it's an expression of the character. But I think the intention, of Zweihander is that it's mostly an expression of the game. It's the same thing with like metagame mechanic systems like fortune points. Like those have zero grounding in characters, right? Let's be fully transparent here. Like they're a meta mechanic. Reward points are a meta mechanic. We say in Zweihander, failure is important as success, but ultimately, reward points aren't born from that. They're just a meta mechanic to grow your character. Initiative is kind of the same thing. For Zweihander and for Flames of Freedom, I can understand the desire to have a more stable initiative system. So what we do with that, when you roll initiative in Zweihander, as I'm sure both of you know, you roll 1d10 and add your perception bonus, right? How aware are you of the situation at the time? And perception bonus ranges anywhere from 3 to 15. The average is 4, and the average die roll is 6.4 or 5.5, so 6. Right. So your average initiative is always going to be 10. So you can use that mathematical model to say, okay, if the game design intent is to be an expression of the meta mechanic and not the character, we need to give players something that still impacts that or is tangible, born from that in-character innate ability to be able to modify it. And that's when you start, and this is really fundamentals of game design, this is where game mechanics are born from, right? It goes back to need states. Like the player has a desire and a need to be able to control their own initiative and when they can go. And that's where a bit of bonus comes from perception. I think Shadowrun's system is intriguing. I think there's a lot to love about Shadowrun. There's some things I don't necessarily like. I think it's a very different game for a very different time period that's carried forward some kind of archaic game design mechanics, but people have a deep abiding love for that system as they're familiar with. And I think that a game designer must always ask themselves, who am I trying to appease with this game? Typically, it's the people who've been playing forever. Like, that's your immediate audience. You got to at least satisfy them. Otherwise, you end up with D&D 4th edition. So you ostracize people. So, but those are worthy experiments. I think Shadowrun's system has been battle tested, and it works for the people who love it. You have to have a deep love for that mechanic system because the lore is so fucking brilliant. It's amazing. Yeah. It's brilliant.
Love it.
But yeah, to answer the question, I think that I think that players have a desire to be able to have something their character can control that contributes to that number. But ultimately, the behind the scenes, behind the curtain, so to speak, it is a meta mechanic. It is not intended to be something that is a player can quote impact, although that there are traits and abilities that can allow you to modify that. And that's a fundamental design pillar of Zweihander. And this is where I think where Zweihander, like, it's kind of my experience is that people kind of love it or hate it. Like, remove the Warhammer cruft for just a moment, and you think about the game engine in itself. It's a directional engine. It's intended to all fit together like a Lego set. Oftentimes, what games end up doing is that you have 3+ developers working on disparate systems, and like you have a lead developer who's like pulling their hair out. They're like, "How do I make all this stuff work together?" I had the advantage of developing Zweihander on my own with a really dedicated group of playtesters, which included Adam Rose and Mike Bossler and a number of other people from Grim Perilous Studios. So a very dedicated group of people who helped us battle test the shit out of it. But that's the foundation of Flames of Freedom. So we have this opportunity to take that elegance and make that elegance into something that will work in different contexts without going to, looking toward the clouds or navel gazing here for a moment. I think there's things that I love and things that I hate about Zweihander. In full transparency, there's things that I absolutely think work and things that are just like, I wish I could just get rid of it. And you'll see that in Flames of Freedom. Without tipping my hand, you'll see systems that have been changed to meet the demands of audiences, to satisfy people who love Zweihander, and also to address what I think are fundamental fractures in Zweihander's system. Initiative was probably the biggest. It's the bugbear in the room. We knew we had to kill it, so we slew it. We took its gold and now we're wearing its head like over our own. Like,
I'll say this much: I think it's brilliant the way that it's put together. A simple D10 roll still gives you randomness. And then you have a bonus that's roughly half of that still accounts for this is who this character is. Some are better at it than others, so it adds a still little randomness. So I sometimes with like a D20 roll for initiative, like I might have a +3 or 4 on my D&D character, but if I roll low, like my guy's just really slow today. And it doesn't matter how much I'd put initiative if I just roll low on a D20. Like a 20, in my opinion, is too much of a range. So I like the 10, and I like the little bit of bonus added in there. And to me, that's all I need from like an initiative system to feel good about my life, or bad about it if I roll bad. But it's still to me that works perfectly for me. So I'm glad to hear like I think that's something I can appreciate about all the systems I've seen in Zweihander. As a GM now who's ran it 2 games. I got 1 more game session to finish my second online game, 3 offline games, and who ran it at Gen Con for you as a
thank you for that, by the way.
Online GM for some random people I'd never met before in my whole life. I can say like that all the systems in your D100 system that's powered by Zweihander, I feel like everything after you make the character, you get a sense of who the character is in those systems. You come into a social entry and you're like, I am not good at this. My character is horrible. and there's nothing I can do. There's no role that's going to save me from the horribleness. And then you get another system like, this is where my character shines. And you get that through and through once you have that character made. And you just like, these are the things I do. These are the things that my character's not good at. And I think that's a part of the beauty of the system is that it, for a character you don't always have full control over making, you get a very good sense of who they are very quickly. And the system is completely behind that. So,
Absolutely. We have a wisdom check question asked by Airlaser here. So let's see. How does one go about deciding to make their own game system? When did you get the idea for Zweihander? And what were some of the beginning steps you took to get there?
We covered this a little on your first interview here. You don't have to rehash it completely, but if you want to answer it, you can.
Yeah, in brief, I was married for a stint to a girl who lived in Minnesota. I was at her parents' house on Thanksgiving. I was entertaining divorce. This is like a super cynical story. and I was like, I'm going to make my own game. And I, because I loved Warhammer's system, but I hated the game world as I just did not like the old world. I think it's mostly because I love my own game world so much. But I was like, I want to make my own thing. And I think my first iteration, I think we shared some sheets out actually around this. I came back from Minnesota and I created these character sheets, and like I had in my mind, like I was already thinking like layout design. I was like, it's going to look like the cool black, white, and red layout of Mad Men. Like it's going to be this super slick looking thing. And we've shared some character sheets and professions out from that, I think, over the years. But I think the big driver ultimately was like, I think this, and this is true of every game designer, save for perhaps Rick Stafford and Gary Gygax, who were kind of the, they created, Dave Arneson, who created the original RPGs. Every RPG is born out of someone's frustration with the current system.
Yes.
Rarely are things created whole cloth. It's another kind of pillar there. Very, very rarely. One can take ideas and kind of change them just slightly and they will appear unique. It is honestly smoke and mirrors. There is such a thing as original game design, period. There's a falsehood. So I think when it comes to creating a game, you take the things that you like from one game, you try to make them work with another. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like kit bashing. Until you get it right. And by the way, I'm a firm believer that every dungeon master out there is already a game designer. Because you're already creating your own house rules, you're already creating your own worlds. The only difference is between being a quote game designer and not being one is that you haven't yet put pen to paper. In fact, there was this conversation on Twitter not too long back. I can't remember the gentleman's name. He was a very well established RPG and board game designer, and he's actually an educator. And he had some posts. I mean, this is not to get in Twitter drama, but he's made this post about what is a game designer, and his definition was that you publish something. And my response was no. If you've written something on the back of a napkin, you're now a game designer. Because even if you don't publish it, if you're using it for your home game and you've created something that is intended to be used, you're now a game designer. Full stop. You may not be published, but you are a game designer. So. I always encourage people when they think about, because I think it's very overwhelming to look at something that's like, holy shit, there's this huge book, and like I don't even know where to start. Reality is you've already started if you're a dungeon master. You just haven't formalized the process yet, and that takes time and practice and learning, and sometimes coaching. This is one thing I think our industry really lacks is like the mentor-mentee relationship. We don't really have a lot of that, save for perhaps within the indie game design network, the IGDN. Because people, I think just authors, myself included, a little persnickety, like really, our creative thing is our thing. You got to protect it. And I catch myself doing this all the time sometimes too, even though like I'm a big advocate for information share, especially working on Flames of Freedom, where I've had to kind of like change a lot of my paradigms around this. But I think game designers are sometimes guarded. There's like a super secret that only they're holding on to, and they're unwilling to share those things. I think that we as an industry would benefit from having a formalized mentor-mentee process. This is why Twitter is so valuable, because you get a lot of different perspectives from designers, guaranteeing you could separate the wheat from the chaff. I think you know what I'm talking about. Follow game designers. That's the best place to start. And create the thing that it's really going to be about. It's going to be born from your frustration with some other game system. That's just the way that game design works. tabletop RPG game design. Now, it may not be true of board game design or dominoes or fucking, I don't know, card games. I don't design those things. I design tabletop role-playing games.
Right.
In my conversations with Kenneth Haidt, with people who've been around for a long time, it's like always the same conversation. Like, I like this game, but I didn't like this thing, so I made this other thing. And that's why we house rule around the game table. We have our friends over virtually or in person. We house rule and we make our own stuff. And boom, you're now a game designer. Congratulations. Seriously. And people will, the crazy thing is that people will pay for that. Now they'll pay for those ideas because they want not only just to have a game design for them, but also kind of fuel their own creative endeavors.
Sometimes you create the game. Sometimes the game kind of creates you. That's it. Just kind of it works right back at you again. You start writing stuff down, and next thing you know, I wrote a bunch of stuff for Horde Huttenberg, and I threw 5 players in there, and then they wrote a bunch of stuff I had. Like I said, it's a beach. I didn't even put guardrails up. It was just like, here we go. Like it's we're just off to the races.
Well,
like
there are definitely emergent things that happen, right? Like I think that's when you're putting together any system, no matter what it is, simple rules, complex rules, it doesn't matter. Once it goes out, it creates something else that wasn't expected. Almost every time. And for me, that comes from the programming world. Every time I make a program, I'm like, it should do this. You get some weird thing. You're like, well, I'm going to turn that into a feature.
I was talking to another designer. He's working on a game we haven't announced yet. And his grandfather designed warplanes in World War II. And he was talking about the differences between German engineering and everybody else's engineering. German engineering is the T perfect. It's like a finely honed diamond, right? It has sharp edges, no flaws. But once you throw a pebble on the runway, it'll explode because that airplane is not designed for that. There's something to be said about sloppy design. And like you said, emergent ideas come from design. They come from game design. They come from imprecise design. They come from when it's like people got frustrated with this Zweihander initiative system. They did their own thing. People didn't like the way that they gained reward points. They made their own thing. They didn't like the way that professionals were. They created their own thing. That's the way that these things happen in a perfect world, like a perfect game design world. Our IP, it has no barriers. You can create your own thing. You can monetize your own thing. That's the purpose behind the community content library, the purpose behind the DM's Guild, the purpose behind the Grim and Perilous library for Zweihander, the purpose between all the other kind of community content libraries is to give people the affordance to use IP in their own way, the way that publishers sees fit, obviously, but to allow emergent design to happen in a formalized way, allow them to use that and build their own things.
Absolutely. We got a couple more questions from Airlaser here as well.
I want to while we get ready to go to those, because I think they'll be relevant to what we're going to talk about. I want to get a little into you got Zweihander. It's been out for a couple of years now. I know this is the back of my book here says it won the ENnie in 2018. So her first question was, how old is Zweihander? And I know that it existed long before it won ENnies at Gen Con, but
yeah, it was so pen to paper. I think it was 2014. And Zweihander went through 4 major revisions. It was first called Core Hammer. It was based on the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay game engine. It was intended to be that, in fact, before it was ever intended to be published. I will caveat this by saying I never intended to publish this book. It was created for my home group. I never designed anything in my entire life. I didn't go to college. I didn't write. I was a creative. I was a painter. I was an oil painter, but I never had a desire to write. But I started creating this thing in, I think it was 2014, pen to paper, and went through 4 major iterations. Its formal release, like the Kickstarter, was in 2017. It released in 2018, or late 2017, I think, early 2018. Ended up winning the ENnies, which was mind-boggling still to this day. Yeah, I mean, that's right there. It's weird. It's so weird. It's a whole other story. Like, I could tell you, Adam Rose and I, when we found out we were nominated, we're like, is this for real? I guess we got to get a Gen Con. Like, we've never been to Gen Con, never been to we have no clue, right? I'd never been to a game convention in my entire life at this point. I was a basic
Seriously?
gamer.
Wow.
Never. No interaction with the gaming community, save for a few forums here and there. So Zweihander formally comes out in 2018. self-published, and it just grows exponentially. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I know how to talk about the product in ways that resonates with people. That was a big reason why it grew so quickly. There was a gap in the market for a game like this at the time that would eventually get filled by other dark fantasy games. So it was kind of like lightning in a bottle. There was a moment. I don't think that those moments are always repeatable, but it was just a moment in time when a game like this could succeed. So then that led to conversation here in Kansas City with a local publisher, Andrews McNeil Publishing, who for those who don't know, they've been around for 50 years. They publish Foxtrot, Doonesbury, Sally, Garfield, Peanuts, comics, right? Dilbert, Doonesbury, like all these crazy things. And I remember when I was a kid, like when 19, I say a kid, but like I was 19, like when I lived downtown and ran, like I run by the building and be like, what the fuck do they do there for? What's this building? I see all these cartoon characters. Now I work there. They published Zweihander, and through my conversations with their board, with their C-suite, they kind of discovered, hey, RPG is a big opportunity for us. We should like make this thing happen. So they hired me on to build up this business, and they republished Zweihander, second print last year. I think it was last year. Yeah, last year, 2019. Yeah. And then there's like another like big surge of interest, a whole new gaming audience, is what we discovered. And this is really more of an industry kind of insight, is that D&D, so D&D is in its 5th or 6th year, I think, at this point. And typically,
life cycle, yeah.
Yeah, there's a cycle, right? It's a product cycle. There's a reason why D&D reeditions. There's a reason why games reedition. Some games reedition because they fucked up the first time. D&D reeditions because it is in this case, specifically for Hasbro, it's a marketing play. They know the life cycle of interest of games. I can tell you people who are using D&D professionally online, so streamers, are now looking to create their own games that are derivative of D&D because they know the audience are desiring something new. It's like, okay, we've done D&D, we've done that, been there, done that. We want to try something else different. That's why Zweihander, I think, was strongly positioned because players matured with the game, right? Most people coming into D&D were young, came in through the lens of actual play, came in through Critical Role, came in through whatever else they did. And then they're like, I want to tell mature stories. So, you know, that was the audience I identified. It's like, I want those people to play Zweihander, younger people, because it represents not only just my values, because I think it's important as a game designer to make sure your values are reflected in what you write, but also they are the future of the RPG industry, full stop. It's like, it's not going to be the old guys. Like I say old guys, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 40, I'm 43. And my interest in new games it's still there, but I'm not going to adopt a new game around my game table. Young people are in that position now, though, where they're like exiting D&D and they're looking like, what direction should I go? Zweihander was positioned that way. It's like, hey, level up your game as Zweihander. Here's the next stop on the train station, right? It's like, okay, cool. You started here, now you're here, and they'll move on from Zweihander. It's the way it works. Hopefully, we can capture them with Flames of Freedom. I know it sounds a little salesy and markety and maybe a little bit mercenary, but the reality is I want to design games for people who like to play games. And hopefully I can capitalize on that energy, that youthful energy and desire and of discovering something different and new than D&D. So Zweihander, through Andrews McNeil now, has become phenomenally successful beyond what I can ever begin to imagine. I mean, we're talking print runs in excess of 10,000, which if you look at 7th Sea, John Wick, like the guy's like, the dude is like, he is like expert veteran designer. And that book runs less than 5,000 books per print run. So we know we're doing something right. We know we're people are still desiring a game like this. I hope that Flames of Freedom is kind of that next step for them. But Andrews McNeil has been that really instrumental in helping me kind of realize that. And a lot of that has to do with their 50 years in traditional publishing experience. Second, it's the first traditional publishing company that's ever moved into RPG. Literally the only one.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And third, like I carry forward, like as the executive creative director, I get to set the strategy. It's not just about making games; it's about like the high level stuff, like what's our 5-year roadmap, right? What's our product line look like? Not just for Flames of Freedom, but what IP are we closing down? What other IP are we entertaining? What game system will it be tied to? What are the things what original IP can we get? What IP can we leverage for licensing? That's under my purview. So these are the things I'm looking forward to, as opposed to just designing Zweihander again, which would be great. Sure, second edition, awesome, yay. But I don't want to do that. That's not interesting. Let's do something different. Let's reiterate the engine against a really interesting IP or situation or genre, like Flames of Freedom. I wish I could talk about the other games. I'm under NDA, but there's other games that are based on this engine that are being made by some pretty major forces from outside the industry. I'll say the RPG industry. I think we'll know something in December. I think we can talk about it in December, but
nice.
We've got a lot of fun things planned. And that's that's the thing I'm most excited about, is that Zweihander exists it's now a game engine. It's not just a game.
Right.
It's the same way that D&D has fueled a multitude of iterations. Like, so if D&D is the lingua franca of RPG, Zweihander will never be that. I mean, the full it's not going to happen. But what I can do is I can develop a line like Fate. I can develop a line like Forge in the Dark. Zweihander could be that thing, right? It's no longer just a book. It's now a game engine. So we're going to test that we're going to throw it against the wall with some strategic IP plays and see how it all comes together.
Now, this is a question Bofferin is bringing up, and I was going to ask you about Flames of Fury, because this is Dark Astral was a book. We can talk very briefly about it. We don't want to get too far before we get into Flames of Freedom pretty heavily here. But he was wanting to know if Dark Astral is ever going to be expanded. Because Dark Astral, for those of you who are familiar with Zweihander, there's 3 tiers of play. There's basic, there's intermediate, and then there's advanced tier. There's 3 tiers. Dark Astral, when it came out, only has the professions for base tier. It does not have the rules then to go on beyond that necessarily. Now, you could adapt a lot of rules from Zweihander to help fill in that gap if you needed to and push it further. But he's wanting to know if you're ever thinking about expanding Dark Astral.
A good question, because the answer is it's not a direct yes, it's not a direct no. I'll tell you the intention of Dark Astral. So when we were working on the Kickstarter for Zweihander, 2017, Tanner, one of our co-writers, was like, what if we made a stretch goal for like sci-fi stuff? And I'm like, sure, why not? Right? Because we didn't have anything to lose. Like, we didn't know how things were going to perform. This is before we're like, hey, this one's $7,000 to print our silly book. We didn't think it was going to go anywhere. So we're like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's just do that. And so like, boom, $67,000. Like, oh shit, I guess we got to make this thing now. So we make Dark Astral, and we sit down. We're like, yeah, we could use a little bit of this, a little of that lore, and it can be this exploration. So it ended up being turned into what we call a chat book, which, a chapter book, everyone knows what that is. But a chat book to us was like, here's a smaller experience. You could cleave off the cake, right? And you could try it out, and if you like it, you can buy a whole cake later on, right? You can get a bigger thing. What we discovered with Dark Astral is that people were intrigued more so by the rules than they were the story. So, because Dark Astral, I think, was kind of born from Tanner and my and Tanner's mutual love of Dune. But we wanted to make something that felt like it was rooted in like, what if the Old Testament existed in the far-flung future of space, where you didn't use radios, you prayed to the God Emperor, your radio comms things, right? And we're like, how can we position this like in the same way that Frank Herbert did with all those strange language to basically say, yeah, you're on a spaceship, but in Dune, it's like a no ship or whatever the fuck it is, right? You have all these weird different things that are like really intriguing and stuff. Well, we did this grand experiment with that, and people liked it, and it sold really well. I mean, I think it's still like, I think it's rated adamantine now on Drive-Thru RPG. But now we have a lot of sci-fi games out there, and even though Dark Astral isn't sci-fi, it's science fantasy. we are now challenged by the fact that there are more popular IPs that are out there that could overshadow it. Dune being one of those. The Warhammer 40K that was just redone by Cubicle 7. And we don't want those comparisons. So I think what will probably happen, if I'm looking in my crystal ball, I think what will happen is that Dark Astral will evolve to become something else. They'll be part of a bigger IP that I can't talk about.
This is the part where Bob says if it's NDA, just say it's NDA. So you're nearing the edge of NDA then at this point. It sounds like. So.
It's the quintessential challenge. But I think that when I talked to Ken Duquette, who did the artwork for Dark Astral, which is fucking brilliant, he's an amazing illustrator, and he and Tanner and Adam have been like, we should make Dark Astral. And I'm like, yes, but and I think that no matter what, at some point in the future, like what, depending on what happens with this thing, I mean, NDA, that NDA life. I want Ken to illustrate it, and I want to carry forward some of the ideas we introduced into it. But I don't think that Dark Astral, as it exists right now, will become a full game. However, we have added it to the Growing Perilous library, so people have actually created adventures for it already. There's 2 that are actually in print on demand, ironically enough, which is awesome because we do print on demand for all of our community content stuff. So people can take that and do what they want with it. I mean, you want to go out and like make a 400-page book out of it and put it on the library, do it. Because I think there's something there. But I as the business owner, so to speak, we can't take a Dark Astral to the next level in its current incarnation. So
right, that makes sense.
Yeah, but obviously there is something we can take to the market here. So let's talk about Flames of Freedom. Now, for most people, are here tonight may not know what's going on. So let's talk about kind of the setting, what makes this special. I mean, I've already looked at the artwork and read up a little bit on it, and it's an interesting setting. I don't know that there's any other game that I can think of that is set in this time period, or that has taken a fantasy kind of angle on that. So that seems new to me.
Well, this exploration with Flames of Freedom actually started in January 19th, 2019. I know this date because I was going through my old emails to find the original email when I contacted the author of Colonial Gothic, a gentleman named Richard Iorio. And at the time, I was still working my day job in advertising, and I was still like trying to concept of what Pathfinder may look like in the future. And we had a false start with Tetsubo, this other game we're working on, whole other story. But I was like, Colonial Gothic, there's just something really intriguing about the idea of like an Amerocentric supernatural horror game that hadn't been done, and it was well researched. I mean, Richard is like clearly like a fan, a deep understanding of not only just like American history but American mythology. And there was a lot of opportunity to grow that. So I knew kind of going into it. I drove to Chicago to meet him, and from here in Kansas City, and we met for a weekend and talked about what Colonial Gothic could look like through the lenses of Zweihander. And I was like, so if we do this, it's got to be different. It can't be Colonial Gothic because it's been through 3 editions, and it can't be the same system. It's going to be Zweihander. We're going to do something different with the lore too. We need to root it in 1776, and here are the reasons why. 1, 2, 3. 1. We need a setting that starts at a specific date because the setting in Colonial Gothic was too open-ended. It was like you can play in 1500s or 1700s. 2, we need to follow the standard in the RPG industry, which says the setting is directional. You can give them the world, right? You can give them the campaign book, but it needs to start somewhere. In 3, perhaps even more equally, if not more important than the other 2 things, is that we need to bring the right voices to the table to tell these tales. So this is the part that's rubbed some people wrong, but so Flames of Freedom is what it became. We had a conversation around the name, around the team, and we decided on Flames of Freedom is the name of the game, and we're going to bring in just some super experienced and some unexperienced people to the table, pay them all well, and develop a new game. and Flames of Freedom is what it became. So Flames of Freedom begins. It literally begins at the very end of the siege of Boston when Washington sieges the city, when the fog rolls in over the waters. That's when the game starts. The eve of the revolution, as we call it. One thing it's a quote historical role playing game, but it is rooted in a supernatural horror. American Gothic literature is intriguing, interesting, and cool, but there haven't been very many games that really addressed it in a fun way. Colonial Gothic is probably the exception to that. So we made the decision to lean more into the supernatural stuff because that not only is it good for sales, but it's also what's really interesting about this time period. We also said that we want to tell the stories of those who have been forgotten. So when we talk about Flames of Freedom, like we can already know that the colonial period in America was fraught with all manner of tough subject matter. And we face it head on. I'm going to be clear. We face it head on. Like we cut history down the middle. Like I think some people got the wrong impression from the preamble we released. So they're like, oh, this is going to be a game about social justice. And the answer is yes, but the way you address that is by talking about the beginning of the revolution. And it really boils down to the history. Not a lot of people may know this, but it started with a riot. And the first person who was killed that actually spurred the entire revolution, it became the straw that broke the camel's back, was the death of Crispus Attucks. He was a black and Nantic man who was shot by the British. And guess what they did? Same things we're seeing in the street today with BLM. People are like, police aggressors are showing up like heavily armed against people who are protesting. So that's what happened. That's how the revolution kind of started. Paul Revere uses Crispus Attucks' image as like a sign of the revolution. Like this whole thing happens. And it's not just him, but we knew that there were stories about people who've been forgotten in the revolution. They were instrumental as a part of it. Women, as an example, are oftentimes overlooked. When we think about colonialism, we think about a bunch of English guys in tricorn hats firing muskets, because that's the trope. But the reality is, both in the fiction and in the reality, is that that's not really how it went down. It was certainly the things that we show, but it's not necessarily how it went down. So we wanted to feature those people. We wanted to feature people who are oftentimes forgotten about in the stories and how instrumental they were as a part of the rebellion. But we also know that it has to be a supernatural horror game. So this is where we started to really dive deep into the idea of secret societies, basically kind of being players behind the scenes. So really the rebellion is just a backdrop. You start out as rebels, but the story changes. It grows with the characters. So we also wanted to ensure that we were portraying indigenous people in America in this game. So this is one of the opportunities we found with Colonial Gothic, is that we have all these indigenous nations that exist at this time period who are being impacted by the revolution, who are taking different sides, who are fighting one another. I mean, the rebellion, I didn't know much about American history until I started reading Colonial Gothic a year and a half ago. And I was just like floored. I'm like, how did I not know about this? It wasn't talking about this shit in
I was going to say
school.
American education.
Yeah, cool. That's why you get a very streamlined version of what happened in history, and that's all they teach you.
That's right. So this led to this whole exploration of like, how do we bring forward those voices, because they have the indigenous people just in general. Like we think about like, oh, it's the people who live in reservations who are impacted by colonialism, but the reality is like they are as varied as the European nations. Like completely, like, from tribe to tribe to nation, even internation conflict. They're as varied as the Europeans and still are today. So we made the decision early on that of the 16 nations we represent in the game, we would find 16 plus cultural consultants to help us understand how to realize this in the game, and to treat it not only just with respect, but to also address the hard things. How the colonizers and Europeans were impacting them, what they did, what hand they had in it, how did it impact their people. So we made that decision. We hired on Elijah Forbes, very early in the process who is two-spirit person, is a game designer, a muralist, brilliant person. They helped us find the right people for the right perspectives, and we looked for people who had lived experiences, right? So lived within those nations and had the oral history that we as white American scholars don't have or talk about in school. And how do we catalog that, bibliograph that, verify that? How do we work with indigenous cultural centers to ensure that we're doing this right? I can tell you, we started this chapter on indigenous nations, which is 40 pages at best of a 600-page book. We started this in March and just completed it today.
Wow.
Today.
Nice.
Well, I caveat that by saying we still have a Shawnee cultural consultant that's starting next week to give us some final notes.
Good.
We're in pencils down. So we wanted to portray that. We wanted to portray Black people, because Black people were very instrumental to the revolution. I think everyone's kind of cultural touch point is Hamilton. And Hamilton gets a lot of stuff wrong. He gets a lot of stuff right too. And so when we thought about, how we're going to address all these really complicated history, even though it's a supernatural horror game, we still have to get the history right. We have to treat it. We have to go right down the middle with the history. We can't sugarcoat it. We scouted out and found three. Well, I think are probably some of the three most not just well known, but like most experienced and brilliant creators who happen to be Black. So the first person we contacted was TK Johnson. I was put in contact with them because they worked on a colonial horror kind of side project theme for Drive-Thru RPG. Now works at Roll20. They were one of our first consultants. The second was Gabe Hicks, who's like mind-bogglingly brilliant. Like, Gabe is amazing. He ran Zweihander at Encounter Roleplay. That's what attracted me to him initially. And I was like, hey, Gabe, do you want to like write some stuff? And he's like, oh yeah, I'm writing for XXX in the company. Like, he'd been doing RPG writing. I had no idea. So he joined the team. And then the final person who joined us was Tanya DePass. And Tanya DePass, Cypher a Tier, runs on Arrival of Waterdeep, deeply tied into D&D, now developing Into the Motherlands with a host of other people of color and Black creators, including Gabe. They're now developing it with Twitch sponsoring them developing their game on Twitch. Like, they paid them to develop it on Twitch, and it's going to be amazing. So we brought them on as not just cultural consultants, but also as developmental writers, because even though the original manuscript was authored by Richard Ioria, this really speaks to what we tried to do as a lead creative on this. I wanted as many voices in the room to parcel out what was there and to rewrite it, readdress it, do line edits, to write net new material, to create a game that made other people feel welcome at the table, not just a bunch of white people in tricorn hats firing muskets, because it's not a colonial simulator. But we're also treating history head on. We're not sugarcoating things. We are saying that, in this fight, in this time, in this period, at this point in 1776, like, this is a new generation of people who are coming together to fend off something that's much, I would say more pernicious, but something bigger that's at play behind the rebellion. No spoilers there, obviously, but there's a lot going on. You have Knights Templar in Maryland, carrying out the Inquisition and how that's impacting people. You have the Freemasons who are conspiring in Boston at the beginning of the game, and it drives toward Philadelphia in the bigger campaign play. You have a number of other secret societies are kind of pulling at the strings of what's going on. So we wanted to say that history is real, cut it down the middle, and mythology, more importantly, is real. So it's not really alt history. It's like the mythology is real. So American culture, to take it up a level, American culture, like we have all of these kind of like local legends and lore of our towns, right? It's like somebody always knows about that guy was killed in the woods and has like one hand and he kidnaps kids. Like those things are fun. Like the story of Bigfoot and Paul Bunyan, and granted, those are like much later in the colonial period, but these things were intrinsic to people who are strangers in a strange land. Right, wrong, or indifferent, they are here. And of course, stories arose out of that. So we take those stories, those legends, those myths, and say the folklore is real. In fact, we took it so far. This is actually due to TK. When we were talking to TK Johnson about how we could really change how we handle our quote bestiary, the first thing they came up with is like, get rid of your descriptions for your creatures. Write flash fiction for each creature. Write it as a folk tale. So every threat in the back of the book does not have like your standard box standard descriptions. It's a folk tale with game stats and an illustration, and we give the historian just enough latitude to interpret it how they want. So you still have all of your game stats. You still have your beautiful picture of the image. You know, it's all done by Dan Mandich, who's doing the interior again for all of Flames of Freedom, just like it did in Zweihander. But we start with a piece of flash fiction, and at first it felt a little uncomfortable. I was like, well, how do I know as a historian, like if I put myself in their shoes, like how am I supposed to know like how it fights and what its ecology is? And TK's point was like, it doesn't matter, because as a game master or historian, you're going to make up your own stories anyway. So now you have something that you can carry forward into the game as a game master and say, like a person can literally, like players can interact with an NPC in the game, and the historian can simply read off that little story. And that would be just enough to be intriguing enough, because I think it goes back to the old problem. It's like everybody in D&D's fought zombies and skeletons. How do you make them interesting? Right? You don't tell them they're skeletons or zombies, but the reality is people know they're skeletons or zombies. They just simply suspend disbelief. We're trying to do here by not only just changing the standard names of the threats, but by introducing the flash fiction, we really try to obfuscate it, not only for players, but for the historian too, to help intrigue them and give them story hooks within the description itself. Yeah. So we're really trying to lean in heavy on the idea of mythology as truth, because what we can't do is create an American Revolution simulator. If you've seen, like, we released the quick plan drive-through RPG, and we've got a lot of feedback. Some good, some bad. It's okay though. Some critical feedback's great. Good feedback's fine. Critical feedback's better.
Useful.
But bad feedback, like SJW assholes, like that's not useful, and nobody pays attention to them anyway, right? Like the shit givens are going to be shit givens. They're going to take a shit wherever they want to. They're not paying the bill, so you ignore them. But the critical feedback's important. So we get good critical feedback so far. But of course, they're seeing just like 61 pages of 600 plus. Right. So while like my inclination is to go and say, well, actually, you're wrong, and here's the reasons why. Instead, it's like the Hamilton song and the refrain, just you wait. Because I think people who get their hands on Flames of Freedom will be really intrigued and surprised in the ways that we've taken Colonial Gothic and really turned the knob up to 11 and made it grow perilous, obviously. But Colonial Gothic originally was a pretty dangerous game. People don't give it enough credit. Like when Richard wrote that game originally, like it was a Warhammer based system. So one of the first things that attracted me to is like, gosh, this feels a lot like Zweihander. I wonder why that is. And it's like, well, loosely based on Warhammer. So his story was not so dissimilar to mine. I was like, all right, cool. This is why we're doing it. So ultimately what this means, like from a nuts and bolts perspective, is he produces a huge manuscript. And I say huge in the sense that it was 1,064 page manuscript. Like no shit. 1,064 pages. And I have to hone it down to 680 and have to write all new material and have to write new game rules and have to play test it and incorporate all these other perspectives. So a lot of the work that went into it the first 3 months was disassembling, reassembling, onboarding the team, parceling out the work, and recreating Flames of Freedom as a whole new thing. So I think what people will be surprised by is that it will feel parallel to Colonial Gothic. It will not be Colonial Gothic. It will be Flames of Freedom. It will be something different. It will be Zweihander based. We'll use that game engine. And it will play toward ensuring that, much like in the same way as Zweihander, where we do randomization, for all character creation, the way that we move people away from the stereotype of the white English guy firing a musket and a tricorn hat is by randomizing character creation. That's through introduction of culture, profession, remove, we've even taken what was based in Zweihander for random character creation and rapidly improved it for randomization. So now you end up with some really intriguing opportunities within character creation, and you can see that in the quick start. If you download the quick start right now, which is for listeners, it's free on ttrpg. We have 7 pre-made characters. We're completely generated randomly. Completely random. And in the same way you think about Zweihander, where you get a bunch of random things together and eventually your character's a mosaic. It's your responsibility to explain why it is. Same thing in Flames of Freedom. The character is a mosaic. You're going to generate some random stuff that will feel uncomfortable the first few rolls, but once it all is on paper, you're like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought to play this, right? Because I think we talked about this last time. We always go back to the standard archetypes. Like, I'm going to be the male fighter. If you look at D&D Beyond stats, the most common character created is the male fighter, human fighter.
Yeah.
Human fighter, right?
Right.
So this forces you into uncomfortable areas to avoid uncomfortable conversations around stereotypes at the time. So it's a really long-winded way of saying Flames of Freedom is a supernatural horror game that takes place in 1776, and it uses the Zweihander game engine, and it is meant for everybody, not just people who like American history. It will have plenty of history. It will have plenty of things that'll tick off on that. It'll also have a lot of fiction that people will not know is in the history. Like we present it in a way that you can't really distinguish between fact and fiction. This is really due to Richard's writing. Like, he's really good. Like, I would catch myself being like, did that really happen? Like, all the time. And I consider myself to be a pretty smart individual, but like, I'd be reading the manuscript. I'm like, is this real? And I can't distinguish, and he still won't tell me at times unless I do my own research. So the team did the same thing. The writers did the same thing. That was kind of our big driver. So we made this Kickstarter, and here we are tonight.
Very nice.
So
yeah, that was. Oh, go ahead, Dustin.
I was just gonna say. So I think there is something if you had just the Zweihander core book and you look at the rules that exist in there, and you're like, what other settings could this similar rule set work into? Where you got black powder, where you have alchemy, you have these things. It just seems like it fits so well into colonial time. Like, it is. You're right. Like, you think about guys with tricorn hats with muskets, but like, most game systems can't even accommodate for the idea of a musket. Like, at least you already got the bare bones of that stuff that's needed to transition perfectly into this sort of this game system. So it seemed like, when I saw that you guys announced this, it seemed like a natural fit for what should come next for you guys, for what you want to do with this system.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's if you look at the level, when I think about the level of technology in Zweihander, right, it's like early 1700s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
1776 is not very far away.
Yeah,
you're talking
right
early modern era. So the leap between Zweihander to Flames of Freedom is not as large as, say, if we went from Zweihander to a 1980s retro game.
Right.
Right, like we're gonna make Miami Vice with Zweihander. Like, it's not like it's a huge leap in logic, and I think that our strategic decision to create a game that was close in time, to Zweihander's level of technology, certainly helped, because I think what people will find in Flames of Freedom, much as they find in Zweihander, is that all the stuff works together. You now have the opportunity to take systems from both and put them together, because everything we develop is 100% compatible. It may have different systems in different iterations, because every game has its own demands from a development perspective. But it will all fit together. It will not be. I think about the way that Warhammer 40K was done with Dark Heresy Only War, Rogue Trader. Like, all of those games, we had the same system, but you couldn't play them together. The way they were designed by Fantasy Flight Games, they had different power levels and different things, and you couldn't put them together without, like, you had to really
serious
like bend
work.
break rules. Yeah, it took a lot of work. I don't want to do that. I want the opportunity for Dark Astral to fit into Zweihander, to fit into Flames of Freedom, to fit into the next thing that we'll talk about eventually. All those things will kind of fit together like Lego pieces. a Lego collector. Like, it's what I do now. It seems like in COVID times, and I've got old sets from when I was a kid, like the 1980s spaceships, and I've also got I got the big Millennium Falcon I just bought like less than like 2 months ago. I started on like the big one, and at the end of the day, all Lego pieces, right? They all fit together. I could pull those sets together and put them all together, and like they would still make the same thing at the end of the day. So, Flames of Freedom is designed the same way, where you can use things from Flames of Freedom in your Zweihander game, and vice versa. So, the leap in logic, from a time period perspective, is not a big hop. It's like 50-ish years between Zweihander and Flames of Freedom. So it's all kind of in the same era, I guess, to some degree you could say. But I think that'll be a big attractor for it, is that people will find that they can use that across the game line, across in each other's games, and not just be like, we're playing Flames of Freedom, but we can't play the stuff from Zweihander because that's not fun, or we can't use the stuff in Mongosh in Flames of Freedom because it's a totally different game. But the reality is, it all fits together. And we're taking precautions not to repeat the same information. So every game that is powered by Zweihander in the future has its own unique things it can do that doesn't undo the work we've done historically.
Nice. There's a lot of things that sound like they're going right in this. I wanted to touch back on just how awesome it is that you went through the trouble of actually getting, correct cultural representation, going through those extra steps, because you're right. Our education level on this stuff is pretty piss poor at best, and it's certainly skewed a certain way that does, in fact, make those stories disappear. So that's really cool. I am really intrigued by that approach too with the monsters you're talking about, or not necessarily monsters, but because I think it creates like an image into a person's mind that they get to run with. It's kind of like the first Alien movie, right? So like you have that like fear of what the hell is this thing? I don't know. Let me fill in the blank. Here's what this guy told me. Here's the legend. Is that real? I don't know. And I think that makes that scene a lot bigger whenever it gets revealed eventually. And I think that's going to be a really nice touch. Now, are we talking like cryptids? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so some of the creatures, we call them threats, because the intention is that everything can be interacted with. Nothing is. So let me step back for a moment. So at the highest level, where bestiary is typically aimed toward is like, here's something bigger and badder and more colorful you can fight.
Right.
Right. For those who play Zweihander, the thing you quickly learn in the game is pretty dangerous. And that you are equipped with many different tools and subsystems to solve challenges in a way that D&D purports to do, right? There are three pillars: combat, exploration, social. They don't do a good job of delivering on that. That's okay. The D&D is a different game. Zweihander does. Zweihander is built around what we call the four pillars. So it's exploration, social intrigue, chase scenes, combat, and if you consider Mongosh, naval combat. So you have all kinds of different subsystems you can use. So when I thought about what the bestiary would look like for Flames of Freedom, it's like, now these are things that can be interacted with. They're spirits and legends and cryptids and people in weird stuff that has enough stats to be able to use it both in and outside of combat. There's been a purposeful winnowing down over time. Just, I think, if you just my own experience, just kind of looking at RPG books, games have really honed their bestiaries down to the things that you can fight, so you can earn more experience. And they tell interesting stories. I think D&D has done something really interesting with their monster manuals that I absolutely love, like the layer powers and all that fun stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah,
stuff.
I do like those a lot.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Really complex things that add to those fights when you get into them.
Right. That's right. But they're all meant to be fought.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I see exactly where you're going with this. Yeah.
The interactivity has been stripped out. You don't have the skills for interaction because it's not important for what's happening. It's up to the game master, the dungeon master, to plug that into their story and make it part of make it playable in the sense that it's not a combat thing. So, Zweihander in Flames of Freedom specifically says that we will design for all situations. We will design contextually, depending on how people choose to interact with it. You want to fight it, you can fight it. You want to engage in social intrigue, you can do that. Like we build our threats, as we call them, in the back of the book for that. So you will find cryptids, you will find spirits, you will find super unusual things. You'll also find a lot of common animals that were true threats in colonial period. Badgers and wolverines and beavers and flocks of birds and giant wasps. They don't exist in real life, but they're part of the game because they're a cryptid. You'll find, like, you want to go hunting for a moose? Well, you played Red Dead Redemption 2. You know how dangerous that shit can get. Same thing in this. It's like there's a sub economy based in the game of like if you want to be a fur trapper in this game, you can be a fur trapper and you can actually hunt and you can turn in furs for money. Like that system is built into it because it we treat it in the same way. What was that movie Leonardo DiCaprio came out maybe like 3 years ago? Revenant.
The Revenant.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Love that movie because it teaches you that the true enemy, right? We learn later on. It's actually, Tom Hardy Bane. But historically, but also Mother Nature, like, does not care. It is coldly neutral. So survival is a big part of claims of freedom. And if we look at history, most people lived in cities in this time period. They were not expanding westward. That was not happening. This is not the gold rush of 1847. People were living in Boston and Philadelphia, and they were not going beyond that. They were staying where they were meant to be because it was uncharted territory. They didn't know what was out there. So they say in the safety of the cities, because it was still a burgeoning society. So journeys matter now, and more importantly, we can introduce these things that people are not accustomed to that we may, like in passing, be like, oh, it's an alligator, no big deal. But are true threats to characters both at basic tier up to advanced tier. Like these things pose a real threat, so you have to survive. And I think that at the end of the day, like when I think about what Flames of Freedom is, like I go toward the idea of like, it's definitely supernatural horror, but really it's really survival horror, I think, at the end of the day. Because I think that's the foundation of Grim Perilous gameplay, is like surviving your injuries, having the right supplies on hand, navigating where you're trying to go safely. That I think is really kind of the core experience that Flames of Freedom will offer. But it will be filled with all manner of fun stuff in the back of the book you can interact with.
I don't want to derail too much, but our party last night traded weapons for bandages and honey pots.
Oh yeah. Much better. Much better stuff.
Surviving in these games that are powered by Zweihander is a feat in of itself.
It's Oregon Trail. Oregon Trail, Oregon Trail, the first survival horror game ever created. It really is.
You were playing, but that's what it was. You're right. The moment you didn't bring an axle, it broke. The moment you brought too many wheels, you didn't need them anymore. It didn't matter what you brought; it was always something else.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, it's funny, kind of looking back at this stuff too, and we think of like monsters and whatnot, but like, have you gone back and seen the depictions of crocodiles or alligators by people who only heard about them?
Yeah, they're insane.
It's amazing.
They look like chimeras. Like they're not chimeras in the D&D sense, but like the true, like, historic, like, chimera. Like when people first saw elephants, like they're like, it's what? How do you even interpret that? And then you see like the medieval manuscripts that showed them. Very frightening. And we knew that at this point. So 1776, that's basically the age of reason, right? So we had to say that people are probably not nearly as ignorant as they were, say, like the medieval times, whatever. People are mostly literate at this point, at least those who were Christian. So we knew we could still carry forward some of that supernatural stuff, and that's why we really leaned into the folk tales, the flash fiction. So when TK started writing about the brown bear as an example, you think about these very standard threats, and it's like, well, how can you express this in a way that's interesting and intriguing? And you can tell you can tell a story, right? You can tell a story about what this thing is, and I'll give you I'll read off the example. Like this is, I don't think no one's ever seen this yet, but let me find the bear, and I'll explain to you why I think this is so interesting. Because the stories are told they're so strange. in this sense. Trying to find out. I apologize.
Oh, it's fine.
But
While you're looking that up, I just dropped the link again for the Kickstarter project. So be sure to click on that, take a look at it.
Air Laser said she's never played Oregon Trail, and I just recently got my son a handheld Oregon Trail. It's like the whole game is on a little handheld device, and he loves it.
Yeah. So this is the grizzly bear, okay? And this
God,
is how
grizzly bear.
This is how the folk tales position. So it was high summer when we first saw a family of them all walking in a row, a mama and her cubs. They raced through the tall grass and tumbled into the creek behind the wheat fields. We kept our distance, of course, as messing with a bear that size is likely to bring only trouble. We found the head of that mama bear in our barn in late autumn, surrounded by bird bones and candles. We moved south before there was frost on the grass. So it's a story that basically says, this family, like, they saw these bears like in early summer, and then like by autumn, like someone had killed the bear, beheaded it, put it in their barn, surrounded with bird bones and candles. And like now you have the suggestion of like something supernatural is going on here.
Yeah.
And this is the way we position all of these things. Like I think about the Vavavitch, right? The movie that came out, like how it like takes like these ignorant people living in the middle of nowhere who are indoctrinated by faith, and like it just becomes this bizarre tale. You're not sure what's up and down at some point. You're like, is this real? Is this fake? Is it Black Peter, I think was his name, or the name of the goat was? Like, is he really talking to her? Like we when we approached the flash fiction, that was the approach. It was like the flash fiction, the folk tales have to be evocative. They can't just be about alligators live in the bayou in the Great Dismal Swamp and they're going to eat you. Oh no, because that's not interesting. It doesn't tell you anything you don't already know as a reader.
I was going to say that kind of almost insults your intelligence as a person. That you don't know what an alligator is, and it has to be explained to you on a full page explanation of alligator at this point. Like,
that's right. We know what alligators do and what they can and what they we know from game mechanics. We can express in game mechanics like what it does. But
death roll, that's all you need, right?
Yeah. But the fiction must suit the theme. And the themes in this is like it is supernatural horror. Like you have to, everything's positioned that way. Everything that's in the threats chapter is positioned that way. It's not just about like the Minuteman, and that Minuteman is like trying to kill the British. It's like the story's a little different. It's a story that provides adventure hooks. So
yeah, I like that because
TK introduced that. Yeah,
it kind of has a feel to me like in like Fallout games, when you find the environmental storytelling. You show up and there's just objects in the room. There's nobody there to talk to you. You're just like, okay, what the hell happened here? And then you just start to piece it together, and whatever fiction you're coming up with becomes the narrative. And I think that's really interesting.
That's right.
Because it sets a mood very quickly, and it's the player filling it in. And that sucks them in.
That's right. So so I think about the Ravenloft, right? Ravenloft is the go-to gothic horror RPG. That's the thing that people go back to.
Yes.
But Ravenloft was less interesting than Mask of the Red Death. Mask of the Red Death took place a little bit later on, and as opposed to basically creating gothic horror stuff, it created like this really creepy, insidious horror that somehow managed to skirt around the idea of Cthulhu. Like it avoided that completely, and created this really intriguing tales that you could adventure in. It was unfortunately a product that kind of went unnoticed. It didn't sell very well. Fortunately, there has been efforts by people that release stuff on the DM's Guild to revitalize it. It's really interesting stuff. But when I thought about like the horror elements, I didn't want it to be on the nose. I don't want it just to be about, oh, here's some skeletons and here's Frankenstein and here's a bunch of mummies and here's all the stuff you would ever see in any other horror game. Like we have to not only deliver like the horror elements in the mood, like you said, like the mood has to be delivered, but we also have to show it through the gameplay. Great example of this is in Zweihander. So the way you kill skeletons in Zweihander is you can't just bash them. You can't just you don't just use a mace or whatever like in D&D, hit them with blunt damage. You got to spread their bones and destroy the receptacle. They're what I like to commonly call puzzle monsters. I love puzzle monsters. Yeah, I like
those. Yeah.
Less about dealing damage, less about it being a bag of hit points, or in the case of Zweihander, a bunch of damage threshold. Yeah. Instead, being about like destroy it to the point, and then you have to do a special thing to completely dispatch it. Like in the case of the Red Revenant in the back of Zweihander, it started out as kind of a banshee-style creature, but the reality is that Red Revenant is the risen spirit of a lover scorned. The way that you completely destroy Red Revenant. Should I say anything? Or do you have it in your current game?
Terror and Treefell.
Should I?
I know.
I should. I won't.
I used the Red Revenant as the basis for the main bad guy in Terror and Treefell. But
oh my gosh! Okay,
go ahead.
You have to find the ring that was placed on his finger and put it and put it back in the grave. You have to restore that. It's a puzzle monster, and I love puzzle monsters. A good way this is done in video games is God of War. God of War has all kinds of intriguing ways you have to learn to fight mini bosses. Same thing in Zweihander, same thing in Flames of Freedom. These things can't just simply be dispatched with weapons and spells. You have to. There is story and narrative to be able to get rid of the thing. The mood, and you establish that mood by having mechanics that deliver on it as well.
Absolutely. No, that's one of the reasons why I picked that bestiary for the thing that I threw in Terror and Treefell is for that exact reason. And then I changed up what it is. So I changed it enough that you don't recognize it as a Red Revenant, but it very much is a Red Revenant.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I like to do with your guys' bestiaries. Like, I did the same thing and again, this is not exactly spoiler territory. None of the groups I've ever ran through my game have gone there yet, but I put the High Elves on top of a mountain, and they're ruled by a King Nikilos, who is a Nephilim. Because it talks about how they fell from the sky, and so then these elves start worshiping. He's Grim and Perilous Santa Claus. He hangs up there with the elves. He's got a totem pole that he hangs out with in a longhouse. All of the heads of his deer are up there mounted on the wall because he's slain them all, and he wears their blood-soaked cloak. And he sits up there, and he's just Grim and Perilous Santa Claus hanging out on top of a mountain with a bunch of elves. So no one's ever gone up there to find him yet. So I haven't ever gotten a group to decide that they were real enough to go up there after. Every group decides that they're just a myth. They don't exist, and they're just made up by the townsfolk people. So no one's ever gone to find them. But there's just a couple of lines in the Nephilim description in Zweihander that led me to that point of they were taken, they were overthrown by the ogres because they didn't share their wealth and their gifts. So I was like, well, Santa Claus shares all of his wealth and gifts, and that's why he's the one Nephilim who's still left. That's where he goes. So that's how he becomes Santa Claus. He gives him gifts every year so that the ogres don't come kill him. So
wow,
that's great. And that's a great thing I think about RPGs. To go back to what you were talking about earlier is that I think Tanner and I really enjoyed writing the descriptions for the creatures of the back of Zweihander. We had a lot of rap sessions around that over numerous weeks as we developed this whole new series of lore. But when we looked at Flames of Freedom, and I thought about the level of effort that goes into it, it's is the juice worth the squeeze? And I was talking to TK about this, and TK is like, let's not do any descriptions. Let's just do folk tales. And suddenly it's word count shrank, and more importantly, the what we wrote became meaningful. So TK Johnson wrote a lot of the threats. Elijah Forbes wrote some, and then James Intercasso, who I'm sure most people would know. Yeah, James wrote. He's wrote the last 4 big releases for D&D. He's worked with Critical Role. He wrote the Explorers Guide to Wildemount. He's coming in to write the last, I think, 26 entries for all of our human threats, and working on now a Zweihander campaign to be published in 2022.
Oh, nice.
Awesome. Well, we got rated in this period of
year.
When
the Lollygagger showed up, I think those guys.
And we are kind of hitting that point where we're out to the wrap-up point, but I figure we can just do another snapshot of what the game is. And I'll relink the Kickstarter here.
Yeah. I've got all the time in the world tonight, so if you want to extend, we can
keep going.
We can get. It's 11:30 my time, but I'm not going to work tomorrow. Tomorrow's my off day. That's why I'm having a drink and chat with you gentlemen.
I'm only putting in 15 hours tomorrow, but don't worry, I can.
Keep going.
That's brutal. That is the grim and perilous work week.
Healthcare in COVID times. hours are hours. You just
the lollygaggers rated.
Yeah, as I said, Jeff the Lollygag.
Yeah.
They might appear over on Zweihander RPG, your guys' Twitch channel every once a week or so, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way, not only to the lollygaggers, but to Present Company as well for supporting Flames of Freedom. We just hit $50,000 today. So that tonight, in fact, right before this, so we unlock the dice, and all the stretch goals are free. Anybody I think is backing 75 plus gets like all the stretch goals completely for free.
Nice.
Literally just unlock the dice, and now I'm like, now we gotta get the game master screen. Yeah. So thanks for the raid.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been a really interesting topic because we've kind of gone everywhere because we've got the history, you got the strange occulty aspect of it, because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of meat on the bone for that, because like the more you dig into like the origins of the country, the more you see just like the weird occulty angles that are there. And of course, anytime you talk about like Knights Templar and Freemasons and any group that's kind of like a closed society where you can kind of impose whatever your belief is on that thing, it leaves it wide open for really interesting stories. And I can imagine there are just a shitload with all these secret societies.
And that's not even counting, that's just what the Europeans
real ones.
I'm just saying, that's what the Europeans brought.
That's right.
That's not even including all the other indigenous like things that existed here as well. Like there's a lot of mythos there that you can really dive into as well.
Yeah, I think Secret Society is really big where we start to deliver some of the bigger story arcs. In fact, they factor into the adventure that's going to be, it's in the main book, which coincidentally I think was just announced today, maybe. Defenders of Cobalt are going to run Boston Besieged from the book, like beginning to end. Like it's a big damn adventure in the back. It's like a 60-page adventure with a sandbox in the back.
Damn.
It takes place in Boston. Yeah, they're going to run that on the Zweihander channel. But it involves secret societies, and I've only mentioned two. I think there are 5 major ones in the book. They're secret, but the Freemasons and Knights Templar are certainly a part of that, as is the Inquisition. There's a lot there, and I think that's where we can really deliver on the idea of like, because one thing we wanted to get away. We didn't want to do anything for Cthulhu. Somebody asked me the other day, they're like, are you guys including Cthulhu mythos? I'm like, well, there's other games that do that really well. This game does not, because this game is not that. And part of me, was sad about that, but the other part of me is like, you know what? That frees us up to do whatever the hell we want, because there's enough information around these European secret societies and in North American and indigenous secret societies that you'll learn about in the book, that would be great to explore, and for us to avoid territory where the people are doing it, we could do it way better than we could. We're not Chaosium, right?
It's got its own game based around it. It's hard to beat a game based directly on like that mythos. Like it bears the name Cthulhu. Like
that's right. If we can treat the Freemasons in an intriguing way, we've won. Because there's enough stuff there to deliver something that's equally as interesting, to drive story. I think that this is the big challenge that we kind of faced initially with Flames of Freedom, when it would boil down to, when we look at the manuscript, like what is this game, right? Because this game could be a lot of things. It's about the rebellion. It's about fighting monsters. It's about rediscovering parts of America. It's an exploration simulator. It's Oregon Trail. It can be a lot of different things. But what we discovered in the process is that the kind of like center tent pole, is that it's based on these secret societies, and they have their hands in everything. Like vast conspiracies across North America.
Conspiracy was the word I was thinking. Specifically,
infighting and outfighting, not just fighting against one another, but fighting with themselves. So that was kind of the crux, I think, of when we started defining like who are the quote big bads in this game. It's the secret societies. So this is why we brought on James Introcaso, because this is a discovery. Probably about halfway through the process, we're like, we need to write some human threats in here that deliver on this, because the story certainly does, but we need some things in the book to help us deliver on that from a threats perspective. So we brought on James to create those things for us, and he kicks off the project tomorrow. In fact, I think tomorrow's Wednesday. He starts on Wednesday. he'll be rolling off another project. But he starts on that, and we'll have things to interact with and fight. We'll have a lot of details on the secret societies in the historian secret section of the book.
Nice.
It will not be player facing, because once again, secret society is going to be secret. So we have a cutover point, just like we do in Zweihander, like a big, beautiful color plate that says, okay, from here on out, it's just historian stuff. We'll have the same thing in Flames of Freedom, where players stop reading and the historian starts. And a lot of that deals with the secret war behind the scenes, against an enemy even greater than the secret societies. There's much more at play that's actually predated even the Europeans being in the United States. But it also good dives into the secret societies and how they impact the story, because that's really up to the game master to decide. In fact, what we may also find in the back of the book, we're kind of waffling on this right now, is like the inclusion of secret professions that players can potentially adopt, but that's guaranteeing that they make these ostium bargains with these secret societies, because let's face it, they are not the good guys. They're not bad, but they're not good either.
You got me reaching for my main Gauss book here. Are you talking like this level of stuff? Like, for those who are familiar?
Not so on the nose, I think.
Not so on the nose?
As Mongosh. More conspiratorial, more subversive, less about like grotesqueries growing from your orifices, as Mongosh delivers on, and more so about world-spanning conspiracy in the same sense we may think about, like the way we may think about the Illuminati, the darkest recesses of the internet. We kind of want to deliver on that, because there's something really intriguing about the idea. Like, I remember Top Secret by TSR back in the day. It was so awesome. Cool. Yeah, and I was like, how can we make these secret societies feel like cults? And how can we deliver on that in the writing, and how can we deliver on it from a story perspective? And I think we've done it. Fortunately, Richard Iorio, once again, the manuscript's author, has a deep understanding of all this. So that was the foundation, and we added more layers. We reflowed the text. We rewrote parts that need to be rewrote. We wrote new things whole cloth, because it necessitated it, to ensure we're delivering on the campaign setting. So secret societies are certainly a big factor in that, and they become part of the story. Like within Boston Besieged, they factor in almost immediately. Like, the players get wrapped up in a pretty big conspiracy, unbeknownst to them, through benefactors and malefactors in the game, and they will and players will brush up against George Washington in the first adventure.
Oh, wow.
Like I said, Boston Besieged,
away from using those like important, notable historical figures. Also,
well, you said mythologized, right? Yeah. That word I'm trying to pronounce.
But I will say this: George Washington is not a vampire. He's not. It's not like anything like that.
Right.
His wooden thing, right? He had the wooden thing.
That's right. The starting adventure will take place during the Siege of Boston. And the player it's right after Knox has brought the cannonade from Fort Ticonderoga, and the players are thrust into a situation in the middle of Boston. In fact, the quick start has a pre-adventure that takes them to Boston afterward at the very end of it. Because that quick start adventure will basically root you in all the themes, all of them.
Nice.
Like all the major themes in Flames of Freedom, you will get a feel for. You're like, oh shit, okay, this is creepy. Now I want to see what happens next. So, Boston Besieged, it's in the back of Flames of Freedom, because all of our main books will have an adventure in the back. It has both a regular adventure, like it's a standard, like here's your branching adventure, and it also includes a sandbox for afterwards, so you can continue to adventure in and around Boston in a sandbox style environment. That's one change we made. One thing I really wish we'd have done on Zweihander is given people like a place to play in. We're giving people a place to play in the main book.
And that's what I did for Zweihander. I kind of, because that was what I was missing by the time I got done with Bitter Harvest. I was like, well, cool, like, but you can't stay in Vorburg. So like, what's outside of Vorburg, you have no idea. Like, so it's cool then that you kind of get this place now to run around in kind of afterwards, because I do feel exactly like I felt that exact thing missing when I got done with Bitter Harbor.
Yeah.
Like, well, we're not a word back to Swansea, I guess. I don't know.
What happens next, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think our assumption at the time was like game masters will figure it out, but the reality is that people want adventures and stories. That's not been our core focus. I think when I look at the game line, we're changing that. James, and that's why we brought in James Tercasa to deliver this like the big can, I like to refer to him as. Like, the guy is like, first off, he's fucking brilliant. Okay, James is the nicest guy in the world. Okay, he's incredibly brilliant. He knows a lot of people in the industry, and he's achieved a lot of renown in the time that he's been writing. He's worked on some very large projects, and that's because he is a consummate professional, and he's a really good storyteller.
Yeah.
And when we looked at how we can deliver like a full campaign for Zweihander, now we're maybe 2 years out by the time he publishes it, we wanted to do something that was big and impactful. And I think that, we'll see how it proves out. If this proves out, then that justifies business case to create big campaigns in the same style that D&D does. For the most part, we've relied on the Grown Perilous library and the librarians, and by extension, Grown Perilous Studios with Adam Rose and team to help deliver on adventures, because people are creating their own stuff and releasing it and earning money and turning it into print on demand. And it's great because that then frees us up to focus more so on like big games like Flames of Freedom and big games like the next thing that's coming. It's going to be announced, I think, in December. Yeah, we need to focus on the big stuff because we're not wizards. We don't have limited money, but we're also we want to do things smart. It's kind of a truism in the industry that adventures don't sell, but they're necessary to feed fans.
And you got really good people in the community writing too, like Sean Dammy, and we got some people like that who put together some of these great adventures that you can see on Zweihander RPG, because Matt Jowett is running the in between. There's several of them out there that have been put out that are fantastic. So you're getting it. It's just it's not coming from the top down. It's coming from the grassroots up in those cases, and it's really cool to see those things out there. And some of them are making their way into book like form and print. So I mean, if you're out there writing it, like it can get there. So
and those people are now working on Flames of Freedom. That's the beautiful thing, is like you have this self-sustaining kind of engine where like you can identify freelance writers to work on us for big projects by looking at what they're doing on the Grown Perilous library. But I think that really speaks to where I think our kind of one of our principles is that because we say that this is Creative Commons licensed material, you can create and monetize it if you do it on the Grown Perilous library. So we have a place we can focus. We can basically point our fans to and say, this is the tip of the spear if you're looking for adventure. Look at Concordance of Freedom, right? Look at these other things that other people have created. Look at what What's Per Million is doing. I mean, at this point, I think we're at like 13 print-on-demand products in like less than a year, but there's over 122 things in the Grown Perilous library in the 2.5 short years it's been up. Yeah. So I think that really speaks to the passion of the writers, the passion the Zweihander community has, and what we very likely will see with Flames of Freedom too. We'll have an announcement around that being may or may not be part of the Grown Perilous library. We'll have an announcement about that here, I think, in the next couple weeks.
I was curious if that was going to be included before you were done, if those works would go in there as well.
I want it, not my decision, but I'm feeling probably about 70-30 on it right now. We'll see what happens, but we'll know in the next couple weeks, because it would be fantastic to allow people to write for Flames of Freedom too.
Well, it's an interesting thing that you're kind of setting up here, because it feels like the old school, 70s, where I wasn't around, but 70s era D&D kind of time where everyone's throwing in their ideas into the big pot that is forming this new stew, whatever it happens to be. And, creative ideas getting added into the pot, new stories popping out, new systems coming out, and that sort of thing. It's really nice to see lots of voices getting involved from the community.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, from that point, like when I think about like the OSR, I think of old school role playing, like that style of development. It's good because people are kind of recycling each other's ideas. I think there's something there with that. It has that world comes with its own baggage, but if you look fundamentally at the if you look fundamentally at the principles of what they're doing, it's about like how can we take each other's ideas and plus them up. Another good example of this is like Leather, Steel, Blood and Bone comes out by Jeff Steele, and Ken Duquette and Adam Rose worked on it, and it's sold incredibly well. People love it. You know, I think it was our first print on demand product for one, but the design is brilliant, but also the game rule stuff. But yeah, the game rules are great. So I approached Jeff when we started working on Flames of Freedom and this other unannounced RPG, and I was like, hey, we want to incorporate this in our core game line. We're going to change some rules. We want to incorporate it. Are you cool with that? And we made an agreement and we stamped it, and now it's going to be canon. So, so we have with the Grown Perilous Library, you know, we have this opportunity to not only just like find new ways to look at the way we play the game, but also to find great writers and work with them and pay them for their ideas, pay for them for their work, and continue sustaining the need state for game masters, which is give me adventures to run, give me new game rules, give me new professions, give me new ancestries, give me charts, give me solo rules. You know, like all these things exist in the library, and that really is due to the extreme passion this community has for Zweihander. And I will say, being involved in multiple discords, because this is where a lot of these things are happening, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but when I look at the DMs Guild Discord and their level of engagement there, and I look at Zweihander's Discord when their librarians are creating stuff, it's a tale of two cities. Yeah. People are fiercely protective of their thing on DMs Guild, but it's like a commune on Zweihander's Discord. It's a fantastic feeling. In many of these people who are in the Discord, many of the librarians, as we call them, who are developing stuff for Zweihander, freelance stuff for the community content, they're also creating things for other community content libraries, and we have no problem with that. Like, if they want to take the adventure they wrote for Zweihander and bring it over to, I don't know, Symbaroum, if Symbaroum had a community content library, they'd be perfectly fine to do it. We don't prohibit that because we want to give them enough freedom and leeway to do what they want to do. Right? They're going to make money too. So hopefully they bring their adventures from a different system over to ours and recreate it. I know I could tell you, Earl of Fife did the same thing with Forever Winter and the Dark Astral Adventure, which the name escapes me right now, but those were originally in other systems, and they redevelop it for Zweihander, and they're also print-on-demand products. And we give them as much support as we possibly can by paying them 60% of royalty, which nobody else does that.
I was going to mention if you did that last I looked, it was like 60% went to the writer, which is just phenomenal. So
no other community content library does that, full stop. We also offer print on demand with the only thing they have to do is just put it in the correct template. That's all we care about. Throw it in the right template, and we'll do print on demand for them. So you can actually have your stuff in publication and do print on demand. And it's been successful for us. I mean, it's a small group. It's a super highly concentrated group, but they're super passionate, and they work together, and they find ways to iterate against each other's designs. We've got a fanzine now. It's like releases every quarter. There's been 3 issues released, all in print on demand, and it continues to grow. And I really hope to see that with Flames of Freedom as well. But once again, that's not my call. That's a parallel discussion. But I feel like I said, I'm feeling 70-30 on it. We'll see what happens.
Wow.
I know, like I said, I'm definitely working on stuff for that Grim and Perilous library down the road. Once I'm done with my playtest groups, I'm still running groups through my own stuff before I get to just to hone down on where I want everything to end up at before I toss it up on there. But I'm definitely still working on it. I'm super excited to hit a point where I can put that stuff out there. So
I don't know how you're going to turn this one into anything. Huttenberg is, I don't know how you're going to make that into an adventure for average players.
my adventures, the way I run them, are very much the same way that I write them. They're very modular within just the adventure itself. Like, you plug and play which parts of it you want to put in next, and just advance
Right.
everything else to the next set point and see where you end up at. So that's very that. But it is, in my opinion, it's very hard to write that. So I got to figure out. I'm not a great writer. Going through the process of figuring out how to put that into a format that someone else can later realize it's more of a puzzle than it is a railroad. So it's
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was kind of surprised to hear that adventures are kind of like a dead end in terms of like, turnaround. Like, because you see some groups like like Pathfinder with their adventure paths and stuff like that. It seemed like that was a pretty popular thing for them. Now, is it just the fact that there's just so much development cost that goes into that it's hard to make the money back, or is it just that there isn't a real audience for it?
Well, there's several factors that contribute to this, and I want to caveat this by saying, and I am not the end all be all here,
Sure.
But
no, you speak for everyone.
What I can tell you is that in the publishing world, there is a tool called the NSB, and you can basically look up any ISBN you want in the world. I can look at book sales for Player's Handbook right now for D&D. I can tell you exactly how many they sold up to this point. That doesn't include necessarily everything that's been sold in person, but anytime an ISBN is scanned, it goes up into the cloud and it reports back. I can look at Barnes and Noble sales. I can look at United States sales. So I use that as my barometer, so to speak. The observation among several industry professionals over the years is that small adventures, tend to be loss leaders, right? You develop it with the anticipating of losing money because it's going to feed the beast, because there's a desire for people to see that, and it continues the game line.
I see.
Continues interest, right? So it's exacerbated by the fact that most of these used to be done in print format. Print formats, particularly when you're talking about. So if you think, let me think about this. So if you think about the standard, let's think about just like a book print run. Okay. So without naming names, one of the more popular recent 2020 RPGs that got stellar acclaim, Forbes, on comicbookresource.com, everywhere, has sold less than 4,000 copies.
Oh.
Now in the RPG world, those are big numbers, right? Those are big numbers. So now consider this. So if a gaming group consists of one game master and call it 3 players, right?
Right.
Your adventures, the person who's buying is that game master. Okay?
Right.
So that's a very small audience. So when I thought about Mongosh, this is kind of like tying back to that. Mongosh, and really any supplement that is created and I think there are people who are doing this right, and some people are doing it wrong, but in this case it was Mongosh. We want something that was player facing and game master facing, so it's usable for everyone around the table, right? Because now you've got 4 people buying and not just one person,
right?
Adventures cater to one person, so if you do the quick bath on the back of a napkin, your opportunity is not much, and that's guaranteeing that you even sell those. So most people will buy those in PDF because they're like 60 pages or less. Cubicle 7 has done something what I think is brilliant. So Cubicle 7, as we know, is a UK-based company. They have done something really phenomenal with the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition product line. They're clearly revitalizing the Enemy Within, which will sell because it's nostalgia. But the new adventures they produce are done strictly to PDF, and they're flooding the market with new adventures constantly, right? Because it doesn't cost as much. You get your overhead for writing, and they have an image bank, and they have layout, and they have editing and proofing, but you don't have to add a cost of shipping and storage and distribution and supply chains and all that. So I think this is intentional on their part. It can't not be. Dom, the guy who runs the company, is a brilliant man. Cubicle 7 has been, I think it's a case study in like how a small company can grow big in the right ways, the same way that Modifius and Green Ronin has done. But I think they made an intentional choice. I think they did. They made an intentional choice to do a number of PDFs for adventures to come out. and it's worked for them brilliantly. So when I thought about this from the purposes of Zweihander, I was like, well, I don't want to just do a bunch of adventures because it's costly, because I want to print them all. But you can do like annuals, or you can do like 5 adventures in one, or the thing that I think rough nights and hard days, or whatever the thing that Graham Davis did, or Jeremy Davis, with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition. They collected all those things together and made a new thing. That was cool. Didn't sell well, but you know what? It was interesting and fun and new. Then they just started flooding the market with PDFs of adventures, which is great. I think it's a smart strategy, especially because being in the UK and producing in the UK and getting distribution in the United States is a complex beast. So, and with Modifius, especially if you're spending all your money on IP, but figure out your strategy for releasing product. I think what D&D has done conversely, and this is really a flip from, say, 3rd edition back, you used to get a ton of adventures, a ton of settings. Like, you constantly have like something for Dark Sun, Forgotten Realms, Planescape, like not only just settings, but stories and adventures is back to back to back to back to back. The TSR story is very, very well spread territory. Everyone knows why it failed. One of the reasons for it is because they produced too much material that was not selling. So 5th edition, through the power of Hasbro, a company that has been marketing toys for years and years and years and years, says, nope, you're going to release 1 to 2 big adventures a year and make an event out of it. And that's why Sent into Avernus and the Wildermount book, which is now one of the top-selling books ever. Oh, it's out. It is. So what I last saw, it's nearly outsold the Player's Handbook.
What?
Full stop. Yeah.
Seriously?
The Player's fucking Handbook. So it's crazy, right? So yeah, the numbers are astounding. This is all visible to publishers, coincidentally, if you have access to this ISBN NTB site. But they did it smart. They said 1 to 2 big releases every year, making an event, get influencers to talk about it, to play it, and then take a small group of your community content creators to create content to release on the community content library via DM's Guild at the same time. That is a model to emulate. If I have the strategy I want to implement at Anders McNeil Publishing, when time comes true, that will be our approach, because it's a smart financial play, but also it produces a ton of content. So everyone, and what it boils down to is like conversation. This is to step away from RPGs for a moment. Everyone online right now is talking about the new campaign, Icewind Dale, right?
Right.
We're all going to be playing it for the next year until the new one comes out. So D&D conversations are around that and will remain around that for the next year, the next big release. And they're all talking about that release, the next release, talk about that release. So all the conversations are centered around that, and it keeps the conversations going. If you release too much stuff in the market, the message gets lost.
It's true.
You dilute it.
Yeah.
You dilute out your focus of where everyone's looking and what they're going for. And as we say a lot of times with pre-made adventures, we don't like them. We're homebrewers by nature. So it's like I said, this is why I'm a horrible writer, because I'm a homebrewer by nature. But you go for that shared experience. So like when you see somebody running Curse of Strahd, it's because you survived Curse of Strahd. Now you're gonna watch somebody else do it, or you could talk about the things like how did you tackle Room 12 in Tomb of Annihilation versus how we did Room 12 in Tomb of Annihilation. There's that familiarity. That's the one thing you do get from these pre-made adventures. You don't get from a homebrew experience. Like that's the one thing you can get back out of it. So it is, you're right. They do have to space those out so that all the time and energy goes into talking and seeing how people are tackling in the forums and everything else that exists around them. And it very much is that.
I think my kind of read on this, and this is really to Wizards of the Coast credit. And they're kind of like right now they're the bad guy, but we have to recognize the things that they've done right. And I think that Nathan Stewart, so their head of franchise, the VP of strategy there, I think that this was kind of this is probably his brainchild. I think his idea of how they would do a product release strategy, it's fucking brilliant. This is the sort of stuff that national campaigns and advertising do. These are the sort of campaigns that I've ran, not D&D campaigns, but campaigns I've ran, in my former life and advertising. These are sort of things that how we would teach clients to create product and talk about product and release product. It's a reason why the iPhone event is a big deal every year. You don't create 5 iPhones in 5 months. You create 1 iPhone every year, and it becomes an event, and people talk about it, and the buzz goes up, and all the marketing hits, and people talk about it afterward, and you have the hacks and the tricks and the tips. In the same ways that we see, like you said about Curse of Strahd, people start talking about how did you defeat Room 12, right? What did you do different than I did, right? Everybody's having the same conversation.
Yeah, as someone who streams and who watches streams, I'll sit in and watch my friends like over at Featherfall Tabletop currently running Curse of Strahd, and you'll see people hop in and be like, "Are you at Amber Temple yet? Are you there?" Like they just want to know, like, is it coming up? Like, okay, no spoil, won't say anything more. Like they just want to know where you're at so they can start following along. Like, and then you see that immediate instant understanding of the situation, and you start to look at other people. One of my players in my Zweihander game, Alex Thomas, he ran Curse of Strahd over at Geek Unleashed, and so like I can take my other friends like, hey, go watch this guy's run of this because his Strahd was amazing. Go take what you can from him and then figure out how you're going to do your Strahd. Like, and you can see the little differences in how people approach these things. So that familiarity is vital, I think, to that buzz around those as far as players are concerned. Maybe not in a whether they make a dime off of it somewhere, but as far as the end users, like that's where now I'm more interested in perhaps purchasing that book. Whereas before, you're right. I would just let my DM buy it. We'd have ran through it once, set on a shelf, be like, hey, remember that time we played that one? That was cool. And that's all we'd ever done out of it.
Yeah, I think that's the intriguing thing about Explorer's Guide to Wildemount is that it, unlike Curse of Strahd, which was clearly a campaign, there's not much player-facing material in there, but Explorer's Guide took a different approach, and that was the same approach we did with Mongosh, a year ago, was that make something that appeals to everybody. But making something big and amazing, like a story everyone can talk about, is the best approach. I really think, as an industry, in general, an RPG industry, we have to start thinking less like RPG companies and more like product companies, CPG companies. Take this up kind of at a higher level. This is really, due to the credit of Hasbro, there's a reason why Wizards of the Coast has been able to just explode. There's a lot of reasons, like that Critical Role as a partner, influence like Joe Manganiello, all those other things. But I think more so than anything else, it boils down to at the end of the day, like they have a really solid product strategy. It's really good. Whether you like the product or not, you have to respect the game, and they understand how to productize D&D in a way where everyone, like you said, we're all talking about this, we're all speaking the same language, at the same time. And when we're on the next thing, we're looking back at the people who are finally picking up the adventure from the year before and running and be like, the Amber Temple yet? Like, and exactly. And does conversations persist? And then it precipitates another release of Curse of Strahd, and it precipitates a re-release of an old thing. So these are lessons that I think we as publishers should listen to and should apply, because I think oftentimes what companies do is they get too worried about, like, I need to be unique and do my own thing. But the reality is, if you're not running a relay race like every other publisher is, you're not in the race at all. You can't crab walk your way through it. This is not a swim meet. It's a marathon, and we all are running the same marathon. So if you're not passing that baton off and doing the same sport, you're already behind. The unique thing will come up later. Run the same race, and that's the way that I think tier 2 publishers, because D&D is a tier 1 publisher, so is Pathfinder, but tier 2 publishers who are kind of people in the middle, who are not the indie games in tier 3, but tier 2, they get distribution in game stores, they get product lines, they get IP, they get people who are playing D&D and something else. They have to try running the same race as D&D within means, within the money that they have, but that requires some change in way to do business, but that's a whole other conversation for another time.
Well, I feel like just as a parallel, maybe it ain't the right parallel, but I feel like the tabletop game industry is starting to be treated like a real industry the same way that comics were, with like they finally took comic books and decided they can make legit blockbuster movies out of it, and all be damned, they're huge event films. And I feel like maybe they're starting to treat tabletop RPGs the same way. Like they're taking it seriously. It's not like just some small side project on the side. Like people are starting to take this stuff seriously enough that you can start to see actual products being put out on a regular schedule that you can then anticipate when the next one's coming.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, in reality, is for D&D, you know, just to kind of like end this short little discussion about this, the way that they approach RPG is not. It's not as a tabletop RPG. It's as brand extension. And by what I mean by that is that there's a reason why Descent to Avernus was written the way that it was. It was to support Baldur's Gate 3. There's a reason why the Drizzt Do'Urden toy is now in stores. There's a reason why you can now play dress up as Drizzt. There's a reason why all these things happen because to them it's brand extension. This is the same philosophy that traditional publishers preach. Anders McNeil Publishing is a great example of this. People like to. I think when people think of Anders McNeil, they think about them as a publisher. The reality is they're really just kind of an agency. They represent their authors, and they publish their book, and they look at different ways that extend that brand in different directions. Anders McNeil is got deep reach into Hollywood. We've got things we're announcing soon. I'm pretty sure it's already been announced. We had a deal with Nickelodeon, deal with Netflix. There's a bunch of stuff going on there for some things that you may not expect to see on there. But we're always thinking about ways we can extend RPG into that world as well. We acquired Welcome to Tycor, Brandon Dixon, great writer. When we look at acquiring RPGs, we're not looking just to acquire a book. We want to see how we can extend that in different directions, from animation to television to calendars to whatever else it may be. And not all RPG publishers don't have that opportunity. Anders McNeil does, because it's not an RPG publisher at the end of the day. It's an agency. RPG publishing happens to be a part of their business. Right. And that's why it is truly unique. It is unique in the sense that it is the first traditional publishing company to take on RPG, because they see the opportunity not just from RPG, but also to extend these stories and characters and worlds into elsewhere, because Hollywood is super hungry for new content. Super hungry. Super hungry. This is why they're kind of, they've went back to the well too many times. They revitalized the same IP over and over and over. This is why we're seeing all kinds of weird new dark fantasy pop up on Netflix. Dark fantasy is hot commodity. We may be 10 years out. We're 2 years out from Game of Thrones ending, but that show ran for.
Cool. I mean,
yep.
Just that's exactly the kind of stuff they're looking for right now. It's
yeah, it's true. There's a lot of interesting IP out there, especially in the RPG world, that has been kind of forgotten. There's also a lot of old RPG IP that's being kind of dug out of its grave and being revitalized by publishing companies, because they now see the opportunity to extend the brand. Look at Warhammer. Look at what Games Workshop is doing. I mean, they've never been more successful in their entire life at the company, and yet they have television, cartoons, novelization, models, RPGs, toys. I mean, it's phenomenal. They're going to have toys sitting on shelves at Target that have nothing to do with the RPG, but it's based in the 40K world. Funko Pop. I mean, you have many different ways you can realize that brand in different ways. So, publishers, RPG publishers publish RPGs. D&D is not an RPG publisher. Sorry, Wizards of the Coast is not an RPG publisher any longer. They publish product. They extend brand. And that's why they're successful, because they have those relationships with Hasbro, because they understand the value of the IP, and they have that uniqueness that really no other publishing company, I think, in the RPG world has. It's not just because D&D is the Kleenex of the tissue world. It's part of it, but the majority of it comes from the intellectual capital at Hasbro, the big evil corporation. They know how to extend a brand. And that is their goal, they're doing well. So if we can emulate even a part of that, great. The good thing is that Anders McNeil has 50 years of experience, and we're already doing it for other products. So RPG being a part of that is a pretty natural fit, and I think what you'll find in the next year and a half, you'll find some unlikely candidates coming to RPG books. They're part of the Anders McNeil family already.
Interesting.
That sounds great.
Obviously, that's the NDA world we can't talk about. Right now, but
yeah.
that's what's up.
One other thing I was kind of interested in is, obviously we've been dealing with COVID, so a lot of us have been dealing with, virtual tabletop scenarios, and putting together a game on there is a lot of work. What I enjoyed is I found a prepackaged adventure, and it had all the maps laid out for me, all the dynamic lighting done for me, all the monsters were already in there, everything was written out for me, organized. Is that a product that sells in large enough numbers to be viable?
Well, I can't speak to adventures. I can only tell you what has happened with Zweihander since we released on Roll20. So a little bit of short background is that I started at Anders McNeil before COVID. Some of the insights I brought forward to the board was that gaming online is popular. We know that people who are playing games are coming in through the world of actual play. We know that their first experience and brush against games is traditionally online. We can't be just a book publisher to succeed in RPG. We need to be present in the digital realm. So we began developing Zweihander Player's Handbook Compendium for Roll20. We released it as a free product because we wanted it. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what the interest would be. We didn't know how successful Roll20 would be, but I had a good relationship with Roll20. Zweihander was a Roll20 Spotlight game, which means it's a featured indie game. They're a great company. They were actually started here in Overland Park, just outside of Kansas City. So I had a little bit of kind of hometown pride in wanting to work with Roll20 after they kind of got big. So we developed, the publisher, said, all right, let's throw some money toward it and develop it. So we developed the compendium, which has been incredibly successful, not from a financial perspective, from an adoption perspective, because now people can use that to build characters, and once you can get that in players' hands, because the biggest challenge people always run into is like a game master has to sell a game into the players. So we thought we'd flip the script, let players sell it into their game master. We start with the players first, the players' handbook, the compendium. It's been good for us. We're now going to be developing a paid product for the marketplace. I know some other companies, I'm pretty sure Evil Hat, they do a lot of releases on there. Practically everything they do, they eventually bring to the platform. I think it's sustainable. I think it's necessary in COVID. I think that even after all of this, that we will still be playing online. That's for sure. I think if anything, this has kind of shown gamers who were accustomed to around the game table play, like myself and my players, or my friends who play, we all play together. It's kind of taught us that we can move our game online, but it's not the same. It's not. It's not.
Definitely not.
It's not. It's not the same interactivity. It's not the same dynamic. But I think to your point around like having like something that you can use immediately available, that's good for game masters just to get running, is a smart play. I come up against it's just kind of like the lessons we learned from releasing multiple adventures. To me, even though it's not a physical medium, I don't know how economically viable that is. I mean, I'm sure that Evil Hat could tell you, because they're very open with their financial numbers. It's actually astonishing how open they are about the success of their company and their game lines. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, late last year, year prior, they talked about winding down some of their game lines. So I don't know how successful that model is. I know that, we're now talking to Roll20 about the opportunity for Flames of Freedom to be on there. I want these things to be strategic decisions, not just necessarily the assumption. I don't want the assumption to be, we're going to find this book also on Roll20, because one, there's no surprise and delight factor there. I love surprise and delight. it's important, but more importantly, from a financial perspective, I don't know. I think that's kind of the next step. Like, I think once we develop our next paid product, we develop our quote first paid product, we'll be able to gauge like what that looks like, because the development costs are, one, it's a different skill set. Two, it's a vastly different development cost associated with it. Fortunately, Roll20 does work with some of their partners to develop it on their own time. Some they don't. We got a good, like I said, we got a good working relationship with them, so we're still exploring that as an option. But I think if I had my druthers and unlimited money, I would do everything on Roll20.
Right, sure. Sure.
Everything, because it'd be no question. It's like, yeah, of course, we want everything to be there, but you know, budget constraints. And where I would rather over-index on quality of print and team, in particular, paying writers what they're worth, paying them above industry rates. It's a whole other frustration there, but paying people what they're worth and over-indexing on talent, as opposed to meeting the criterion, which is it has to be on Roll20. Or it has to be on Fantasy Grounds, or it has to be on the Vorpal board, or sorry, Roll, I think is the next one. I think some VTTs are doing something interesting now. I just learned the other day about Vorpal board. I did a little thing for Gen Con.
I don't know what
Yeah. Are you familiar with Vorpal board? Have you seen it?
no.
So
No, that's the first.
what is really cool about Vorpal board, I'm going to give them a quick tout here that I find really intriguing. Vorpal board allows all of your players to have their own mouse on screen, and you can set up a camera over your own terrain, so people could show you where they want to move their figures on the terrain if you put a camera over it. So you could say, you, Sally, have the yellow arrow, and you, Brian, have the black arrow, and then you, Dustin, get the red arrow. Now show me where you want to move your figures on the board. And they could take that and draw a line over your camera, and like your camera's pointing down to your terrain. You can see the terrain. You can see all your faces like you're seeing each other now. The interstitial's already built into the platform. And you just point the camera down. They're like, I want to move my character 5 spaces this way. And it creates a little line. The game master can, at their table, just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and move the figure on the table. So interesting stuff. Yeah.
It is
I'm
interesting.
Yeah, I did it. It was with, I can't remember the name of the group, but they've been using it for their D&D game for a while. I did this little talk on Gen Con. I think it's called Foundry 42, I think is the name of the company. But they're doing their games on it, and it's brilliant stuff. Because that was the biggest complaint that we had. My Wednesday gamers were like, we really wish we could use figures and boards because I'm tired of drawing stuff. I want to see you use all my figures and stuff I have here. And that solves for it. So I think we're gonna try to give it a spin in the next couple of weeks. See what it's like. I really want the opportunity to use something like that and really I spent all this money on this silly terrain to build stuff for.
It's nice too for us that are not masters at Photoshop, right? Like,
Yeah.
I gotta try to put together a map. I'm like, damn it. Here's my little smudge here. That's a mountain, and let's hope this is something useful.
I talk a little bit about how Roll20 is like. I think about like my son and his group. He's just getting into TTRPGs as a whole. He's 15. And he's got a lot of good artistic talent. He can draw, he can do those sorts of things. But with COVID, they've all now learned Zoom. And they're all, we came into the hobby at tables with dice and books and paper and pencils. My son is very likely never going to know that. His friends already don't see each other in person. They only see each other virtually 90% of the time playing Fortnite or something else already anyway. Like, they rarely hang out in the same room except at school. So, like, I could see his generation of gamers coming into the hobby never having that need for miniatures, never having the need for terrain. They're going to so be used to everything being done virtual. I could see that being a bigger push in the future than what
could be
older gamers like us in our 40s who came in with pencils and paper being like, this is what we need. Whereas, I could see there being a market for that in the future. Just if you're trying to grab this new flock of gamers the same way that like 5e grabbed a big, huge influx of gamers. Like if you're looking for that next group coming up, like especially now with COVID and everyone being familiar with Zoom, I could see that being the future. Like, I think what streamers are doing now is the future. Like,
Zoomers are not actually Zoomers. That's the cruel barb, right? Zoomers are actually using Zoom. They're using Zoomers. Yeah, Zoom is now a verb in the same way we Google things, we Zoom each other.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. But I think to your point around like younger gamers, one thing that's kind of I think even despite that, we kind of live in a digital age. This is really unique about the RPG industry. In fact, and really people who like books. People will buy books once again toward the context they want. They're in the car, they'll get the audiobook. They want the physical book, they have that there too. Sure. It is truly unique about like people who like are avid readers. And I think at the end of the day, RPG players are readers. I don't care how old you are or what generation you're born in. Those things change. And I think especially as you get expendable income, right? The older you get, the more expendable income you have, if you have that privilege. But there's a reason why WizKids and the miniature market continues to blow up, because it's not because younger gamers are now buying that because they've got jobs and money and they want those things too. And the reason they want those things is they see Matt Mercer and all those people using those amazing figures are like, how can I do that around my game table? And I think that, from a VTT perspective, Vorpal Board has kind of a unique thing they're doing because now you can incorporate that. I've found in my personal games we're running on Wednesdays, we're using Roll20 like I mentioned before. We end up futzing more with the interface than we do actually playing at times. And I've been carefully thinking around. In fact, I bought this tiny little camera I have off screen here. I bought for a totally unrelated project, but I'm thinking about putting that camera over a little dice box and just rolling dice in it, and letting people see my dice rolls, and us moving to traditional pencil and paper with dice in front of us, or using the VTT for storing character sheets and maps, and doing away with the rolling online. If only because I'm like hybridizing that approach, and I think that Vorpal Board will be interesting to play with that. I mean, once again, I'm a diehard Roll20 fan. They're great partners. We continue to be partners with them too. A lot of people play Zweihander on Roll20. It's pretty phenomenal. Young and old. We see a pretty broad demographic of people talking about it, playing it, talking about it on Discord, sharing macros that they're using. And it's not just younger gamers; it's also older gamers who have changed with the times. In COVID and pandemic era, our games have moved online. But I think it's really intriguing to see what will happen. I'll be really interested to hear more about what happens with your son as he grows older, to learn about how his gaming evolves, because it is the children are our future, and that is. It's not just a song by Whitney Houston or whoever sang it. They are the foundation, the future of RPGs. We will grow old and die, and they will carry that flag forward for us. It will be interesting to see how, especially like kids who are kind of maturing in this period of time, not just people born in it, but people who are maturing toward adulthood during COVID times, how they adapt their own interactions and through the lens of gaming. In the wake of all this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. And I know, like, for the instance, like my son, like, he doesn't have miniatures yet. He got his first couple of sets of dice for me that I purchased for, because he was getting into it. So I went and I bought him a set of dice, and but he can walk in here into my man cave and he can see 8,000 points worth of Warhammer Fantasy up on the wall. So it's not like he doesn't have any exposure to those other things. And someday he may decide he wants a few thousand points worth of skeletons and zombies for himself. But, so they get that exposure still if they grow up with it in the household. Because you're right, like, you have a very nice basement there where you can see behind you. You have your stuff out there. Your kids will see that, and they'll come to understand the value of those things. They can see these books that I have, like Mangouch here, where they can hold it and see just how cool some of these books are, and then they want those physical books. So they'll get it through those means. I think of like myself, though, growing up in a house where there was no gamers in my house. Like it was like the thing I didn't tell mom I was going to do, right? So
yeah.
So I think about like that. Like I did have those things would have never existed in my house. So growing up on Zoom, like in the way that my son is now, like because of school and everything else, like it'd be interesting to see how different it would be. But
Well, they're going to have different ideas of what they want, and it's going to be a different hobby, like entirely. It's going to be unrecognizable by the time it's done, and that's great, because it's going to be perfect for their generation. And it's just same as what we did with our generation.
They'll be
with
the
world, it changes.
I know. I started them out right. I ran them through a very hybridized, trimmed down fantasy game, roughly resembling 5e, but not really. And they all had cookies for their health, and
this is hilarious.
And I every time three big ice cookies for their death saves, and every time they had to make a death save and failed it, I took their cookie and ate it in front of them. And they only got to eat what they had left. And just that small bit of influence just changed drastically how the story of that game went. So it's it was brutal, but it was fun, and they all had a good time wanting to play again. So
all right.
So, well, we are about an hour past where we normally would be.
We pushed it. It's been fantastic.
We are here at the end.
It's been great. We've had a lot of good questions from the chat. A lot of awesome stuff from you, and I really appreciate the time you've taken to hang out with us again. Second time on the show, and look forward to the product line extension as we see it come out.
Let's talk a little timeline here for the Kickstarter. I know it started on October 5th, and you have how many days to reach your goals?
So, well, we hit our initial funding goal ironically in 76 minutes. We couldn't have planned it. The game.
Wow.
The game, coincidentally, the code name for the game was Project 1776. Like, you can't even make this stuff up. It funds in 76 minutes. We just broke our $50,000 goal, which was like the free dice. We've got another. We're in our third week now, so next week will be the final week. We've got some exciting. We got an actual play just happened tonight with Devil's Luck Gaming. They created the original story based in Sleepy Hollow. It's super awesome. We've got a big actual play coming next week from a group of players who are some D&D alumni. We haven't actually mentioned yet out loud, but we're going to start talking about it starting tomorrow. It'll be a fun actual play, but we'll end the campaign on a strong note. It will be obviously the quick plays free right now. Our tentative launch schedule is PDF will be in players' hands by late March 2021. Book will be in their hands by July 4th. 2021, and then the book will hit retail shelves mid to late August 2021, and we'll hopefully have some exciting news to share between November and March 2021 about what comes next for Flames of Freedom. I'm excited. Yeah,
sounds like some fantastic news. I know
we'll definitely
about this time last year when we started hearing about that player's handbook. So I remember the hype around that when it was coming out. So, I'm excited to see what you got next. So I'm definitely looking, I think sometime. And how much more time did you say you had left on that Kickstarter?
This is the beginning of the third week. And it ends on, I think, November 4th or 6th or something like that. Whatever.
2 weeks.
Yeah, I thought it said 15 days left when I looked at
15, it. Yeah, 15 days. That's right. Well, 14 days because now it's
14 now.
But yes.
14 days left to get in
left.
there and help back this project. Not that it needs the money for the backing part of it, but to get like I said, they do not mess around when they put their books together. These books are amazing. The ones for Zweihander, like I said, I would expect that the Flames of Freedom books are going to be every.
Dustin, put them back on the screen. Your camera froze when you were trying to bring it up.
Did it?
And then it came back when it was off the screen.
The only thing that main gouge is it weighs about 1/3 of the Zweihander book, and I want to be able to wield this thing easily. I don't want to have to wield it like a broadsword to get it over here. But the books are high quality. Like I said, I happen to possess 2 of the books that they put out for Zweihander, and being the same company and the same people behind these projects, I would expect they're going to very much feel and look very similar when I get my hands on them as well. So super excited for it.
This is great.
Awesome.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a while since we spoke. Obviously, you've been running on the Zweihander channel, and we don't oftentimes get an opportunity. It's like we're 2 boats passing a fog-bound ocean. But I'm really glad we had the opportunity to talk again, and we should do this again soon.
Absolutely.
If not on air, just to shoot the shit. What's going on in your world? Yeah.
There's always something. It's great having you around. It's I'm looking forward to all this stuff. You've got me excited through this conversation about this project, and that's
played a little Zweihander.
cool.
He knows what the system's going to be a little bit like.
It's got a good vibe to it. I like what you're putting down. It's good stuff.
He also plays a rake, so
If you ever want to run it on our Twitch channel, opportunity is always there.
We may have to.
Let Matt
I
know.
might. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, so that was some plugs there. Let's plug our stuff during the week that we do. So Monday night, obviously, you're here with us on the Wisdom Check. And Dustin and I bring on a guest every week. We talk about something related to tabletop role-playing games, whether it be the artwork, the storytelling, running games, being a player, being good around your table as a social aspect, all kinds of stuff. So we go all across the board with that. And who's our guest next week, Dustin?
Next week, we have Jeff Leeson with us, who just recently acquired the original TSR building and is converting it into a museum. And we're going to maybe get some behind-the-scenes look at that museum, what it's going to be up in Lake Geneva.
Awesome.
So be coming to us live from there. We'll get to see what their vision is for what they're going to do with the old original TSR building.
Let's see, Tuesdays. That's Cameron. He does a couple different shows. I think he's going to be doing Bardic Knowledge, which is the show where he makes music for tabletop role-playing games. And the last time I checked, he was making spooky music for our Wednesday night show, which is a zombie game. So Halloween-themed, dark, nasty, awful thing. So the music's pretty fun. You get to see him building it on the screen with awesome software. He talks about music theory, the whole 9 yards. So I think that's what's going to be. That should be 8 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow. That aforementioned game on Wednesday is an All Flesh Must Be Eaten game where all of us have been bit already, and we're probably going to start the session off having our arm amputated. All of them being the right arm for some reason.
All of us have to lose our right arm at the beginning of this session.
We have no items, no medicine in the group.
Are medical. All of our characters
terrible.
we're gonna die trying to cut off our own arm.
We haven't even got out of the parking lot.
It's gonna be bad. The only thing we have to take our arms off with is the zombies that Air Laser's gonna purchase at the beginning of the game to hunt us down. Because the fans, you guys can buy the zombies as many as you want to continue to hunt us down with. And Levi will honor it. Just zombies popping out of glove boxes. Like, we don't. There's no way that zombie was in that car, but there it was, already trying to eat Jeff. That's just how this game goes. So you can.
It was a brutal game session.
27 more coming, she says. So yeah,
we had a player die when he wasn't even there in the first game session
because he was on vacation with his family, and he had to tune in to watch his character die in the first session. Like, it was. He has to come to session 2 with a new character because he didn't get to play his first one.
So that's what you can do in this Wednesday night as Screw Us Over. Thursday night is video game night. We get together, we play something. I don't know what we're going to play this week. Last week, I played Phasmophobia on stream for the first time. I don't know if you guys know what that one is. It's a weird ghost hunting game. It's all about jump scares and, like, you have to investigate, figure out what the ghost is, and it could kill you in any time. It's crazy, but the fans like to watch people play it and make an ass out of themselves because it's pretty spooky. So there's that. That may happen again because that was pretty fun. And then we're on a hiatus, I think, for a little while for the Everstorm, which is our 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons game. That happens on Saturday nights. We'll have to get the schedule out. If you want to know when that is, best odds are to go to our Discord server and keep an eye out there.
This week would have been Everstorm, but we had to move it up a week because Levi had a conflict. So we had back-to-back Everstorms the last 2 Saturdays, which means this Saturday would have been game. So it's another 2 weeks out before Everstorm returns.
And then the last thing we got that rounds us out is a Sunday game that Dustin does.
Sunday, that's Horror in Huttenberg. That's Zweihander. We just played yesterday. I do have a bit of a special announcement for the last game. Because my current party is completely bonkers, and I mean bonkers, they have decided that now that they have traveled back in time, which they were supposed to sacrifice a young, innocent 9-year-old girl on an altar to a demon just to end the story. It was that simple. I made it that easy.
I don't know why you just didn't do the easy part.
They had to take experimental witchstone casting drugs into the past to try to find the cultists who screwed things up the first time and feed it to them so they don't screw up anymore. that's the plan now. That's the plan. So I had to contact the player of the original cultist and the original crew from my first game, and all of them but one so far are going to be back for the finale. So it'll be the current party, the previous party meeting for the first time. There's going to be Witchstone essence drugs to try to be pondered by a bunch of guys who no longer look mortal. Oh no. Oh no. The last 2 games have been brutal to these people. It's dark people in dark alleys trying to give drugs to the good guys to get them to win for once. And I don't know how this is going to end, but it's going to end in 2 weeks. And November 1st will be the finale, 5 p.m. I just called the game No Tomorrow because that's what they're literally is. There's no tomorrow after that game. So it's game session 9 of Horror in Huntenburg, No Tomorrow, November 1st. Tune in. There's going to be like 9-10 players in this game. It's going to be bonkers.
It's absolute mayhem. So tune in for that for sure. And again, if you've missed any of this stuff, I've thrown it all up on our YouTube channel. And when we get our 200th subscriber on our YouTube channel, which should be really easy to get, we're going to give away a Pathfinder 2nd edition book. So one of you guys can win it.
We're at like 190. We just need like 10 more people. So
yeah, super easy.
Hit subscribe. You could win a Pathfinder 2 core book.
Oh yeah. So I think that's all of our massive plug list.
We do have more. I did. One other thing is, I did drop it on the Discords today. 2021, the 3rd installment of my Zweihander trilogy will drop. I'm going to start casting soon. So Vigilantes of Valandria will be the 3rd segment as we finally hit the Emperor's Throne in Valandria, and you find out all the craziness that's going on there post-Horror in Huntenburg. So that'll be coming up. If you're interested in being a player, you just got to get hold of me. I'm four or 5 players maybe for this last game session, and it'll all be an advanced tier. So I need people who already understand Zweihander. I don't know if I can teach Zweihander. Huntenburg is intended for intermediate tier. Vigilantes of Valandria will be advanced tier. So if you have the Zweihander experience and you want to play in my bonkers ass game, this is your chance. Get hold of me.
Well, the good news for Dustin is after next session of Horror in Huntenburg, we'll have erased ourselves from the timeline, neatly avoiding any changes to his world. So there you go.
It's a chronicle reset. It's a soft chronicle reset. But
the
last one, Jeff, we need to talk a little about your dad's art.
We do. Yeah, the link is in the chat there. Yep, David Lee Pancake, his artwork. He's got a Patreon. He's got a Twitch. He's got YouTube. He's got Facebook. He's got everything. So instead of doing the convention circuit, he does all this stuff online. And he's a sculptor, a painter, primarily sculpting these days. And he does a lot of dragon stuff. And Gladius, you have distinctly frozen on the screen, but I think you're still there in audio format. But if you're not, then we'll round this out for you. But definitely go over there, support him. He's got some pretty awesome stuff on his Patreon. And I like him. He's a cool dude. It's my dad. So I think Dustin may have disappeared. He's normally the guy I asked to set up a raid for us. It is 2 a.m. my time, so we may just go ahead and wrap her up unless I see somebody on here. Who's up here? I don't see anyone on my list right now for some reason, so we may just round this out together. All right. Well, thank you once again. Appreciate you. Dustin's back.
I'm back.
Do you have a raid target for us?
There for a few seconds. I was getting ready to program a raid because I know that's my job. So
yes.
Gonna do the job even though I couldn't hear your cues.
I appreciate it. I got too many windows open that I can't move, and that's what leads to the end being very complicated.
That's why it's my job around here.
But thank you once again for joining me and Dustin and our audience.
We're gonna go say hello to our friends over at Scabby Rooster playing some D&D tonight.
Oh, cool.
So
nice. So we're loading that bus. We'll see you over there.
Everyone else, take care. Go say hi to Scabby Rooster and tell him TT2KB sent you.
Nice.
Peace.